the weed from the marijuana from Franklin is still coming. So I'm helping my brother out with that. But it's starting to slow up a little again. So they're still sending weed, but it starts to get worse. It wasn't like it had gotten manageable. But now since B's supposed to be gone, they're pulling the book again. They're sending garbage up and wanting me to get rid of it. And then that's why I tell them to come get it. Because I found out that tactic. When they send it, they don't want to take it back. They want the money back. It costs them to bring it back. So when you get them in that position, they say, well, hold on, my friend, hold on. They're going to try to argue with you at first. We're going to send somebody up to see if it's there. You send them there, you let them come up, let us see it's all there. Well, listen, my friend, what do you think you could sell it for? And they will start negotiating. You bring the price way down. And that's how you crack them in the ass.
Right.
Where they won't play with you anymore.
Right.
So, but with this here, he didn't like me anyway. He wanted to give it to his garbage men in Ohio. So he agrees to take care of it for the cartel because he really don't want them dealing with me. And what you'll find out as you go on, the Mexican over here and the Americanized Mexicans over there don't want the cartels dealing with us, meaning black people or people like you.
Is that right?
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you something later on. It's going to.
Why is that?
DCU offers generous scholarships to help paraprofessionals become teachers. Visit dcu.edu/parapro.
Online, on-demand Catholic marriage preparation, approved by the church.
In the cool of the evening, everything is getting kind of cool.
This is what the baby doll told me that I learned out to be my rule of thumb. She told me 3 things. Mexicans always lie. Mexicans are greedy. And she said they're also jealous of you because of you. She said that. Who knows how true that is?
I am too.
Just kidding. Well, let me shut up. But anyway, so what I found out is that
So they want, in general, the real cartel plugs always want a Mexican intermediary or handler.
They don't
giving the work to their distributors like you.
They don't want to. They have to because of the language barrier.
Right.
The language barrier, and they don't understand the culture.
I see.
Okay. They don't want them in the place that they are because the cartel has a weakness. Cartel has 2 weaknesses. They're vulnerable with the drivers, and they're vulnerable at the point of sale.
Right.
And what happens is the Mexicans or the Americanized Mexicans, they get in between us and them, and then they make the load slow down sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it doesn't have to slow down. They may hold it. They can't make a movie no faster. It's slow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason why they had me go down to Atlanta, which I found out later.
Okay.
Because they squeeze them and they make them come down on the price. It's too high. You're charging too much. If you just drop it some, we could sell it faster. Or
okay. So there's like middlemen. So right now you're dealing with like cartel middlemen still.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I see. And so they are essentially, and in mid-shipment, they can squeeze the plugs in Mexico, their bosses, and say, hey, you got to bring the price down. And they could lie and say, yeah, my guys in Detroit can't move it at this price.
And see, the Mexicans over there are in a quagmire because they have to make payments every quarter to the government.
Right.
So if you're running a plaza, you have to make a payment every quarter.
Right.
If you don't make that payment, you lose protection and you lose the plaza.
Yeah.
Somebody else buys the plaza, then you have to pay the work.
Right.
And they know the payments, so they squeeze them.
Right.
And there's nothing they can do because they don't speak the language and they're vulnerable.
And you have to make your payments down there to the government or else you can't move your stuff across the border.
And then if the American government wants you, they give you up and all other nasty things start happening to you.
That's right.
And so they squeeze them like that.
I see.
You know.
So that's their issue. But they want you out. They want to deal with you directly. But at this point, they still can't figure out how to do it yet.
They can't figure out how to do it. And then I'm still caught with the stigmatism of how we Black people think this go.
Right.
That, they're the plug, they're the this, they're the
right.
that. And it don't really go that way. So whatever they call, you go because you don't want to lose the plug, not knowing that they're nothing but middlemen. They're garbage. They're,
right.
No disrespect. to my Mexican brothers and sisters out there. No disrespect to you, but they're nothing.
Right.
They're expendable, but we don't see it because we don't know how it really functions.
So
and Danny taught me how, but go ahead.
Okay, but at this point, you still hadn't thought to just go around them.
I didn't know that there was a way to go
Gotcha.
around them yet.
Gotcha.
But I knew off vibe, this one guy, he did not like me because I'm gonna run this other type that don't like you, don't want you over there. And I knew he was in the middle, stopping a lot of, even though I didn't want to deal with cocaine anyway, and I didn't like dealing with the Tijuana cartel, but it was still access to, you know. So what would have been eventually ended up happening, that handler was making money off of me because they needed him there. But eventually, after I worked a little bit longer, bigger volumes, they would have moved him out the way. And then I would have had a direct.
Right.
But I learned that later on from doing more. But anyway.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Fascinating.
So what ends up happening from there, my brother gets cut off. They're not dealing with him anymore. The weed is coming, but then B comes back and takes me over to meet his uncle.
Okay, so you're down in Mexico meeting B's uncle, who is considering killing B. So there's some drama going on. But how does this relationship grow?
Well, what happens is we end up meeting a guy named Chewy. And Chewy is a facilitator down there for basically everybody that grows. And what he does, he takes their loads and he gets a market over here to get rid of it. But he has, he has trucks that are coming up that are basically going to Chicago, like trucks full of marijuana. So B goes back to Boots. He got his uncle there, but his uncle don't trust him. So he gets, B gets Boots to basically speak for him with his uncle. Now, I don't think this guy is his real uncle, but I think this guy is somebody that was real cool with B's uncle or father, whoever, that tied B down there to the whole Tijuana thing down there. Okay, so Boots get Chewy involved. Chewy comes to me and Chewy talks to me. And he's heard about the weed I'm moving. He's interested, but he wants to give me a whole lot more weed. So I go down, I talk to him. So he's asking me like, okay, what would your truck come in at? What would you unload it at? And so on and so forth. So as I'm giving him this information, he's like, well, no, that's not going to work because, you know, so what about the spot on the corner? How does he know this?
Wow.
But what he does, he's talking, but he got somebody using, I never knew about Google Earth. They're Google Earthing everywhere that I'm telling them and looking at the whole damn area. So B likes it, and not B, but Chewy like what he's hearing. He liked watching some of the drop spots and how I'm organized and so on. So he sends up B's uncle to come up. Now B uncle comes up and B comes with his uncle. So I'm gonna show him a good time. I take him out to Benihana's out in, I think about Fairlane at the time. I know Benihana's still out there. So as we're getting out the car, I got a couple of my guys with me. I got B's uncle with me and B. Guess who's coming out of Benihana's? Frank and Mario.
Wow. What are the odds of that?
Exactly, right. So I'm looking at them. They're looking at me. Frank is looking at me, but his face is starting to turn red. So I sense something. Mario is looking, but Mario is more like,
My cashback rewards help me save money on school supplies. But you know who really needs the money more than me? Corporate mega stores.
So we are following a breaking news alert this Sunday morning as it relates to Venezuelan gangs. It's probably not the first time you've heard about the concern as it relates to Venezuelan gangs and, of course, border security. We've heard about this as it relates to states like New York, also Texas, but we're finally hearing about it in the Sunshine State. Take a look at your screen. This coming in on X with Florida Republican Representative Bernie Jacques. He put out, "Today I sent a letter to our Florida Department of Law Enforcement Commissioner to ask about the steps Florida is taking to protect us from the violent Venezuelan gang." He goes on to say these thugs are allowed to enter our country by the Biden-Harris regime. Joining us live this morning to further discuss is none other than Florida Republican Representative Bernie Jacques. Bernie, good morning. A pleasure to have you join us on the show.
good morning, Janae. Thanks for having me.
So I know when you put this out on X, for many people, it was alarming because they're saying, okay, we've heard about this in Texas. We've heard about this in the Big Apple of New York City. We never thought we would hear about this in the Sunshine State of Florida. Let's go back in time. What brings us to this point? And of course, this concern that you have.
Well, what brings us to this point, going back since 2021, when the Biden-Harris regime took over the White House, they've let the open borders become a thing. Not only the open borders, but government-sponsored flights into the interior of our country. And with those invasion-type policies, a lot of unsavory individuals were also let in, including violent thugs, gang members, particularly from this gang called Tren de Aragua, TDA for short. And so what spurred my action to send this letter to our great Commissioner of Florida Department of Law Enforcement is the memo, the internal memo from the Department of Homeland Security that is now public, saying that this gang has a foothold in 16 states across our nation. And so I make sure to reach out to see what Florida is doing to make sure that we are being proactive to continue to secure our state as we've done for many years now.
Absolutely. And when people think about why this is so important, they might think to recent court cases where you have illegal immigrants who are accused of raping women in broad daylight in parks. You think of drug smuggling, all of these different things. And from what you're saying, you're trying to keep that from happening here in Florida.
Absolutely. Florida has led the nation when it comes to cracking down on illegal immigration. We've led the nation and making sure that folks know we are a law and order state. And that's something we're going to continue to do. But we cannot rest on our laurels. We must always be proactive and to look at every potential gap that may exist in order to continue to keep our state safe.
Speaking of law and order, Bernie, this is going to take a community effort. I know you always share, if you see something, say something. Is there an anonymous way that community members can do so? Because as you can imagine, this is very concerning. And for some people, this is a scary time, and they want to be able to report something they see in an anonymous way so that retaliation doesn't potentially happen.
Great question. In Florida, we do have Crime Stoppers where folks can call in on an anonymous basis and provide information that will lead to the arrest of criminal actors. And what I'll also say is that in Florida, we are blessed to have zero sanctuary cities because years ago, under the leadership of Governor DeSantis, we cracked down and banned all sanctuary cities. And so Floridians can have the confidence of going to their law enforcement agencies, knowing that they will pursue these criminal actors and keep them safe. And the other thing I'll say is that there are tools in the toolkit. Just earlier this year, you talk about being proactive. Earlier this year, during the legislative session, I, along with my colleague, Representative Michael, we passed a bill through the House of Representatives that is now law that tackles transnational crime organizations. Now, I'll admit, when I was running this bill, we had the Mexican cartels in mind. This TDA gang out of Venezuela was not as big of a thing yet, but now we have the tools to take them on. And here's what that bill does, which is now law. It reclassifies crimes that are being committed by members of transnational crime organizations if they're doing it to further the interests of that transnational crime organization. So here's what that looks like. If they commit a first-degree misdemeanor, it will get upgraded to a third-degree felony. If they commit a third-degree felony, it gets upgraded to a second-degree felony. If they commit a second-degree felony, it gets upgraded to a first-degree felony. And last but not least, if they commit a first-degree felony, it gets upgraded to a life felony, meaning they'll do the rest of their lives, day by day, in a Florida state prison behind bars.
Bernie, thank you so much for that detailed breakdown. Getting to the crux of this issue, I know you mentioned that this issue is happening under the Biden-Harris regime. You said it started under their regime. What are lawmakers like yourself hoping transitions and happens under the Trump regime? Because I know he's already working closely with international conflicts and border security in real time, and he hasn't even had his inauguration yet.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, under the 4 years of Donald Trump, we had secure borders. It's night and day compared to now under this current administration in Washington. And so we've already been seeing a tone shift. We've already been seeing folks being encouraged by what is to come because we know of the proven record that the Trump administration has. And listen, we now have, as far as the states, we now have a willing and competent partner to help us secure our borders. A lot of these bills that I've been involved in since I came into the legislature in 2022, I've worked on every major immigration crackdown bill that is now law. The reason why we're reacting to the open borders, we're reacting to the lack of a willing and competent partner in Washington, and now we're going to have one in this new Trump administration. We're looking forward to secure borders. We're looking forward to safety. We're looking forward to the end of the madness that has been the invasion facilitated by this current Biden-Harris regime.
Bernie, it's always a pleasure to have these candid conversations with you. As you were mentioning those harsh penalties that could be posed if someone is found guilty of these crimes, I want to ask you, for those viewers who feel like there should be harsher penalties, they might say, okay, well, people who are participating in this gang violence and all the other negative entities that come along with it, maybe they want to spend the rest of their days in jail in America. It's free meals, it's
Maker Place has so many handmade gifts, it makes you want to dance. Maker Place by Michael.
Well, the director of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation made claims about the presence of a Venezuelan gang across all metropolitan areas of Tennessee, and that list includes Chattanooga.
News 12's Nick Hill is looking into whether or not they are actually here in the scenic city. Nick?
I think the key
the Trend
pieces is
gang is active across the state. This gang originated in a Venezuelan prison and has since caught the attention of authorities worldwide. However, the question of if they are actually here in Chattanooga is one local and state officials don't seem to agree on.
I think the key pieces is that we are concerned.
Threat of Trend Aragua, classified as a transnational criminal organization by the U.S. Department of Treasury, and even a terrorist group by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, have raised the alarm bells of the TBI. Gang is accused of drug and human trafficking, among other numerous crimes.
I don't think we're at the point of everyone having to watch outside their homes of this infiltration.
Currently, the leader of the gang, nicknamed Nino Guerrero, has a $12 million bond by the U.S. State Department for his arrest. He's accused of controlling prisons, gold mines, drug corridors, and even border crossings in Venezuela by the State Department. Colombia's President Gustavo Petro said that the gang's second-in-command, Jason Comino, was arrested outside of his country, which borders Venezuela.
Now, the intelligence we have and the information that we gather is that they are back. What we don't want to happen is to see them move into those next phases.
While Director Ralston says that Trend Aragua is operating here in Chattanooga, local officials say that is not the case. Hamilton County Sheriff Austin Garrett said, quote, "Currently there is no active investigation into this gang or its members residing and operating inside of the Hamilton County Jail," end quote. Chattanooga Police Chief John Chambers also stated, quote, "CPD has no evidence to indicate that the gang is actively operating in our city."
2019 in Culiacan, the capital of the Mexican state of Sinaloa. And the Mexican National Guard is conducting a raid at a nondescript house. Sinaloa is, of course, what would be considered the capital of top-level narcos. Its mountainous and lawless territory has long been a base for bandits and outlaws, though in recent years, some of the kingpins have barely bothered to conceal themselves. Like the guy who's just been arrested at this normal-seeming house. He happens to be Ovido Guzman, son of legendary cartel leader Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Ovidio bears a slight resemblance to his infamous father, but he's handsome, square-jawed, and short, just like his dad. He kind of looks like an annoying rich kid you'd see out of Miami, except, well, he's at the top of thousands of trained killers. Ovidio is one of four of Chapo's many children, collectively known as Los Chapitos, who have risen to the top to lead his faction of the powerful Sinaloa cartel after his final arrest in 2016 and eventual extradition. And getting captured by the Mexican National Guard is an amateur move on the part of the 29-year-old, especially in his home state of Sinaloa. But it's never a good idea to count this family out. And this time, the cavalry is coming. Within hours of them being detained, upwards of 700 cartel gunmen spread out across the city. Absolute chaos ensues. Roadblocks, fires, shootings. It's complete anarchy as Culiacan turns into a Mad Max-style war zone, leaving the entire city paralyzed and terrified. Scenes are broadcast all over social media, and the Mexican government is put in a tough spot. Things get so hectic that surrounded Mexican troops call Ovidio's brother Ivan on the phone, trying to calm things down. Ovidio tells him, "Tell them to stand down. I don't want chaos." But Ivan replies, "Hell no, we are coming to rescue you." A few years earlier, Ovidio had been indicted by the US for trafficking meth and marijuana. So if he gets locked up, there's a good chance he'll soon be joining his dad in ADX Florence. Not the kind of surroundings the so-called narco juniors have grown up accustomed to. The cartel sicarios are desperate to keep him free, and even start plotting to kidnap the families of soldiers and police. Some civilians are being held at gunpoint, others are fleeing for their lives. The battles last about 4 hours before, strangely, the sicarios and National Guardsmen meet up, some even shaking hands, and put their guns down. The president of Mexico, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, has decided to step in. He orders Ovidio set free immediately, saying that the violence isn't worth it for just one criminal. It's a stunning display of weakness for the state, one that's broadcast all over the world. In the aftermath of the aborted arrest of the Chapo heir, surprisingly, only 8 people are dead, 7 soldiers and 1 civilian, and a bunch wounded. But the message has been sent. Los Chapitos are willing to directly take on the state, and they're a force to be reckoned with in Mexico, even with their infamous father locked up in an American supermax with no chance of being let go. In fact, according to a Reuters special report on how the Chapitos built a fentanyl empire, in the ensuing months after Chapo's extradition in 2017, 13 police officers in Sinaloa are either killed or disappeared. To quote Reuters, that spree was the start of a shift in tactics within Guzman's Sinaloa cartel, according to 4 intelligence and security officials, one that signaled the arrival of a new force inside one of Mexico's most powerful drug syndicates, the Kingpin's 4 sons. This is the Underworld Podcast.
What would you do with an extra $650?
You can earn up to $650 per year with boost checking from DoorDash.
Welcome back to the Animal Podcast, a radio program where two journalists who have reported around the world on things of criminal nature, myself, Danny Gold, and the amigo Sean Williams, take you on a journey through the global criminal underworld of past, present, and future. As always, you can find bonus episodes on patreon.com/podcast or sign up on Spotify and iTunes. No cold open this week, no updates on Sean's life of domestic bliss. We are just going to get right into it because even though the concept of an emergency podcast is not something that actually exists, I think, we threw this episode together very quickly because of what happened late last week. Might be a little all over the place. It's definitely not what we normally do, but so many people wrote to us to ask about it. So kind of, we had no choice. So obviously, if you're doing yourself down. This is pretty amazing stuff to do over the weekend. I'm going to say that. So obviously, if you listen to this podcast, I'm sure you've seen the news. Probably the biggest underworld news since we've started doing this podcast. El Mayo Zambada has been arrested and is in U.S. custody. El Mayo is arguably the most powerful drug trafficker in the world. And in our opinion, maybe the most powerful cartel kingpin in Mexico's history. He's 76 years old. He's never been arrested and has been a top-level Mexican drug lord for decades, which is just not something like these guys don't usually have a long time on top. It's a couple of years, maybe a decade before they're thrown in prison or murdered, more likely. We just did a 2-part series on him. You can find those back on May 7th and May 14th. We're not going to go over his entire resume. Go back and listen if you haven't before. But yeah, this is shocking news because frankly, it just didn't seem like the U.S. was ever going to be able to touch him. And it seemed a lot less likely that he was going to get touched in Mexico. Basically, all of his contemporaries, anyone he came up with or that has been on his level, has been killed or jailed by now. Most famously, his co-founder and partner, El Chapo.
Yeah, this is like, the Super Bowl, the Wimbledon final, the World Series of Underworld podcast news stories, which is, I'm pretty sure, how the agents would have explained it to Maya on the tarmac, right?
Yeah, definitely. Also arrested is Joaquin Jr., who is El Chapo's son and one of the leaders of the Chapitos. That's the 4 sons of El Chapo who got into the drug business and run a faction of the Sinaloa cartel. We also literally just did an episode on the rise of Los Chapitos. It came out on July 9th and their fentanyl empire and everything that went into that. So yeah, we're not going to go super in depth on them here as well and how they exist, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that you can tell if you read in the media, right, that they don't really understand the Sinaloa cartel, that they don't mention that big split between the two sides of it. But
no. Yeah,
I've seen that a bunch, even in like really prestigious newspapers, which is pretty crap. But yeah, I haven't done much on this this week because I'm pretty lazy, and this is more your turf, I guess, the Latin American cartels. But I did manage to catch up with Vanda Feldback Brown of the Brookings Institute in DC yesterday. She knows like a ton about pretty much everything to do with organized crime around the world. And we're going to put the full, I think it was like 25-30 minute interview up on Patreon for subscribers there. But we're also going to sprinkle in a bit of her thoughts on this show as well, because she's like really great at connecting all the dots of this big drama.
Yeah, if you don't know her work, it's phenomenal. She gets into everything. And we're also going to use a lot of great reporting by Luis Chaparro. He's, the go-to guy on this stuff, in my opinion. We've had him on before. If you don't know him, look him up. Go sign up for a Substack, subscribe to his YouTube, and support him because he really gets the inside stuff, Yeah. But yeah, okay. Sorry, we went on and on right there. But back to Joaquin Jr. He's kept a pretty low profile, And as of the 4 Chapitos, he was the only one who had a $5 million bounty on his head instead of a $10 million bounty. Sinaloa cartel member said that was by design, and he kind of let his brother Ovido, his full brother actually. Remember the Chapitos? It's 2 sets of full brothers that are all half brothers. You guys, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
He let Ovido be more of the face of the operation. He wanted to kind of play the background, almost like El Mayo. However, Joaquin was definitely in the mix, and new reporting out of this arrest seems to indicate he was the Chapito in charge of the financial side of the business. He's been likened to a CFO pretty much. Maybe we'll write to him in prison, see if he can help us out with monetizing the podcast or get ideas on how to move these t-shirts. Underworldpod.com, click on the merch tab. But yeah, here is what we actually know for a fact, along with all the speculation and some theories on what is actually happening. We have El Mayo and Joaquin Jr. arriving at a small airstrip in either Texas or New Mexico and being taken into U.S. custody. The video of the plane is online. It's on the airstrip when 2 men walk up to the plane to greet the arrivals. There was also another video which shows about 15 or so, presumably they're law enforcement officials, in 5 or 6 SUVs waiting at the airstrip. A lot of people are arguing about where the plane actually took off from. Some people are saying Sonora, others say different parts of Mexico. And a lot of people are also arguing about whether the plane landed in El Paso or a different small town in New Mexico. We did most of this research over the weekend, and on Friday, we're recording it on Monday. So some things may have changed, but I don't really think where it landed is like super important. But here's where things get interesting. The Wall Street Journal and New York Times are reporting that Joaquin Jr. tricked El Mayo into boarding this private plane. It's a Beechcraft 2000 with twin propellers, which is kind of lame. I thought El Mayo would be in a G6 or something. They're saying he tricked him into going on that. He was going to go look at clandestine airstrips, while the New York Times says he was going to look at real estate assets, which could be the same thing. They describe it as a multiple-month FBI and Homeland Security investigation. It was a joint operation. And most of the rest of the media is echoing this reporting. CBS News is saying that, they're citing U.S. government sources, that Joaquin cut a deal for himself and to help out, he was trying to help out Ovido, who was arrested and then extradited early last year. Now, in the English-speaking big outlets like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, Reuters, places like that, a lot of what they're printing is coming from anonymous sources in the government or in law enforcement. And I'm going to speculate here, but let's just say I'm not really buying what those places have been saying. And we try not to completely speculate here and like conspiracies, all that, but we're going to get into why this kind of doesn't make sense. So as I mentioned, a guy who is deeply sourced up and focused on the cartels is Luis Chaparro. He's reporting a different story. And shout out to him because he's in the mix. I mean, this is the guy. He's always breaking big news on this stuff, and hopefully we can have him on the podcast again soon. He reports that there was a meeting brokered by a bunch of lawyers in Texas who are presumably cartel lawyers with the U.S. government, which could have been DEA, FBI, DOJ, even the CIA, or all. Who knows? At this meeting, El Mayo himself was there, and 2 of the 3 remaining Chapitos who weren't in U.S. custody. Remember, Ovido, the 4th brother involved, he was arrested last year. He's in U.S. custody. At the meeting were Chapo's sons, Jesus Alfredo and Joaquin Jr., and some other high-ranking cartel guys, including some of El Mayo's guys, too. To reiterate what Sean said and what we said before, the famed Sinaloa cartel has kind of fractured into 3 different factions after Chapo was arrested and sentenced in the U.S. One is led by El Mayo, another by Los Chapitos, and the other, I believe, is led by Chapo's brother. Ivan is the rumored top dog of Los Chapitos, and Mayo Flaco, who was El Mayo's son and heir apparent, they were not at the meeting. Well, this alleged deal was offered to them as well. And just a reminder, 3 of El Mayo's sons and his brother have previously cut pretty sweetheart deals with the U.S. government, and all of them are already out of U.S. custody, which is kind of insane because they are high-ranking cartel guys. 2 of El Mayo's sons currently reside in the U.S. We'll get into their deals in a bit. Now, this alleged deal offered, it was a pretty simple choice, right? Do you want to stay in this game where you'll likely soon be killed or jailed for life, or do you want to take a deal, get freedom again eventually, and keep some of your stacks of cash? Joaquin Jr. and El Mayo said yes. The others said no.
Don't you think it kind of like craps on this high value target thing? If they keep saying they're going to cut the head off the snake or whatever, and they just kind of cut deals with him and let him out of prison in like 5-10 years, I don't know. It just doesn't really stack up as a tactic. But yeah.
I mean, two of those guys testified against Chapo, so that's part of the reason they got those sweet deals. And I think also too, one of the reasons why, if this deal theory ends up being correct, which I think it is, why it happened is, why would they just give up all of a sudden? These guys know what they're getting into, right? They've been doing it for years. Fentanyl, right? The U.S., the last couple of years, especially I think the last 2 or 3 years, has gotten a lot more aggressive because of fentanyl. And the Chapitos are heavily involved in fentanyl production. I believe El Mayo is involved as well.
I guess that would have led to that arrest of the general as well, right? In the Mexican army that happened recently. That high-ranking guy.
Right.
I'm losing his name, but yeah, that would have been a really big coup for them.
Yeah. And if you think it's far-fetched that a meeting between top cartel guys and the U.S. government would take place, we've talked about this on a bunch of other cartel episodes we've done. We've detailed some of these past meetings. During the Sinaloa cartel's various wars starting in the 2000s, there have been documented meetings between them and the DEA where the Sinaloa cartel was giving info on their enemies like the Tijuana cartel. Here's a quote from a Reuters story that came out after this recent arrest. Quote, Matthew Allen, a former special agent in charge of HSI's Arizona division that built indictments against Guzman Lopez and other Sinaloa cartel figures, said both Zambada and Guzman Lopez had periodic conversations with U.S. officials about surrendering over the years. And years ago, when El Mayo's oldest son, Vicente, who was originally the guy who was going to take over from his father, was arrested by Mexican authorities, he was in a Mexico City hotel room talking to the DEA. And the DEA admits this meeting took place. About that meeting, there's always been 2 competing narratives. One from the DEA that Vicente was just giving dirt on his rivals, but another story reported by a Mexican journalist is that he was instructed by his dad and Chapo to try to cut a deal with the U.S. government even back then in 2009. There's also a third theory by a famous Mexican journalist, Anabel Hernandez, that Vicente did in fact cut a deal with the permission of his dad and Chapo, and that he wanted out of the cartel game and to live a normal life. And that his arrest, it was all theater and a secret deal had been hatched for him to do a little bit of time and then go free, which obviously when we're looking at what happened last week, very similar situation.
Yeah.
Potentially. He's actually been out for a few years already after being extradited in 2010. I believe he was released in 2019. So just to bring it all back to Luis's reporting, it's entirely believable that this meeting took place. If you don't think the U.S. makes these deals, obviously Tokyo Vice, that's based on a true story that Jay Edelstein reported. We've had him on as well. That guy Tozawa not only cut a deal, but got a new liver, and that's 100% true. So that was them cutting a deal with a powerful Yakuza boss who then didn't even give them great information. There's other Mexican journalists and even some think tank types that cover cartels closely that are speculating that a deal was made, not necessarily exactly how Luis said it went down, but just in general. And once again, some of these Mexican journalists, their entire careers are just covering cartels, sometimes for decades. There's a lot of rumors and insane stuff that I've seen going around, but a lot of these guys do have good sources inside the cartels. Though, like you said, there's been a whole bunch of nonsense on Twitter and other competing narratives.
Yeah, shock. There's also a big question, I think I've just touched on it before, about what going after so-called high-value targets, HVTs, like mayo, actually does to benefit Washington's fight against fentanyl in particular, right? Which was last year responsible for almost 75,000 overdose deaths in America. Like, that is more than liver disease, gun violence, road accidents. Is really, really chronic at this point. And actually, by removing mayo, US authorities might have just fired a starting gun on way more bloodshed in Mexico and beyond, especially between the Sinaloa branches and its nemesis, the CGNG, the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. So here's what Vanda had to say about that.
Look, I don't expect that we will see any significant decrease in the flow of fentanyl as a result of the arrests of Elmayo Zambada and Joaquim Lorea Guzman. Although they are very important men in the Sinaloa cartel, they belong to different branches, one led by Elmayo and the other one led by the sons of El Chapo, the previous co-founder of the Sinaloa cartel, along with Elmayo. The cartel is diversified and it has many redundancies, system. The operational systems that move the drugs have many different cells. There are a lot of other command structures and systems that will continue moving drugs like fentanyl to the United States. However, the very significant possibility is that we are going to see great increase in violence in Mexico that could spread beyond Mexico across all of Americas and have repercussions and implications for drug markets elsewhere in the world, including in Australia and New Zealand. And that's because the Sinaloa cartel is one of the world's largest, most powerful criminal group. Drug trafficking group, but more broadly, criminal group. And it has been involved in a bipolar war with its arch rival, the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación in Mexico and across the Americas. And the two groups compete non-violently elsewhere. They have operations in Australia and New Zealand. Now, the two branches of the Sinaloa cartel that are involved in this telenovela-like development on Thursday, the Zambada branch and the Chapitos branch, have fallen out in recent years. And there has been infighting among them. So the fact that Joaquim, one of the Chapitos, so dramatically betrayed Elmayo, his putative uncle, his surrogate uncle, to deliver him to U.S. law enforcement, will likely set up warfare between the groups, and other criminal groups like Jalisco Nueva Generación are going to jump into it.
In April 2010, Mayo did an interview with the publisher of Proceso magazine where he basically teed this up. And he said, quote, "One day I may decide to turn myself in so they can shoot me and there'll be general euphoria. But we all know at the end of the day, if they catch me or kill me, nada cambia. Nothing changes."
Yeah, and that interview I think was the only one he's done, if I remember correctly. It was very out of very out of character for him, because like we talked about, he is a ghost. He is a man who does not make mistakes and does not take chances. And again, I'm speculating, but I am leaning toward Elmayo making some sort of a deal for a few reasons. The first being he's been untouchable for decades. He's a brilliant operator, and the DEA even said back in the day they always thought they were one step behind Chapo and 2 steps behind Mayo. And Chapo's been caught 3 times, I believe. Yeah. So now he's getting on a plane that he doesn't control with Joaquim Jr. to go look at airstrips. Like, it just doesn't make sense. The website Inside Crime, who are some of the premier reporters on organized crime in Latin America, though I guess they're more like analysts, they're reporting that according to their sources, Mayo had largely taken a step back in the day-to-day operations in recent years. He's also, again, a 76-year-old man with diabetes and actually, as we learned today, I think cancer, but I'll get into that a little bit later, at the highest level of a cartel, which has been a top for decades. And he's going to go look at airstrips. It's like Zuckerberg going out here just inspecting data centers, and Bezos stopping by Amazon warehouses to make sure that everything was running tight.
Elon Musk shit posted on his own website high into the wee hours. Oh, wait.
Yeah. I mean, I'm asking those questions rhetorically. They might have done that stuff. I assume they haven't, but I'm hoping the answer is no. But you get what I'm saying. Also, in the new transcript, I think of Mayo being, I think, whatever it was that just happened. I honestly, there's so much going on. It said that he's so sick that they had to get him a wheelchair at the hearing. And so he's really going to be out here, all hands on in the desert in late July, being like, oh yeah, nice, a giant strip of pavement and dirt where planes go. I mean, it doesn't, come on, that doesn't check out.
Yeah.
To reuse a quote from our Elmayo series from the book The Last Narco by Malcolm Baith, quote, "One DEA agent likens him to a chairman of the board who operates solely from the top floor and made the executive decisions. Elmayo knew what to do with the money, and he knew how to handle the Colombians. He also knew what was good for business. He was the guy who wants to cooperate and bring people together, the DEA believes." And this is a book that came out 15 years ago. If anything, he's got to be even more removed by now. So yeah, right there, I've got questions. And another question is, he's getting on a plane with a pilot he doesn't control and hasn't verified. You don't not get caught for 30 years as a cartel kingpin if you're sloppy. I mean, you can't even make one mistake. And it's been well documented, like we said, that the Sinaloa cartel as a single entity is no more. And that the Chapitos faction and Elmayo faction have been fighting. And that Los Chapitos weren't happy with the Zambada family because both Mayo's son Vicente and Mayo's brother testified against Chapo at his trial. So what is he doing meeting with Joaquim Jr. without 50 of his own sicarios there to protect him? And I think Sean mentioned this, but the New York Times, I don't know if you're implying other papers, they're still describing the Sinaloa cartel as one single entity, which we know isn't true.
Yeah.
And they said that Mayo had faced a brutal public betrayal when Vicente testified against him during El Chapo's trial. But as we also discussed in our El Mayo episode, El Mayo supposedly okayed Vicente to testify against him when after he was locked up, intermediaries set up a prison call between the two. The DEA fully admits this. So, when it comes to cartel reporting, I trust someone like Luis Chaparro a lot more. And Owen Grillo, another friend of the podcast, he just had a thing that came out. And we're going to talk about this at the end. It came out today. And it's also another fascinating potential theory. The New York Times does say, quote, known as a pragmatist, Mr. Zambada Garcia had been in contact with U.S. federal officials on and off for at least 3 years, discussing the terms of his potential surrender, according to 5 people briefed on the matter.
So what we're saying is that podcasts are more reliable sources of information than the mainstream media?
Luis is. I don't know about anything else. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if MIA has been in contact with them for way more than 3 years. The New York Times also says that the DA was trying to persuade Joaquin Jr. to turn himself in since 2019. The video of the plane landing also seems a little off. We see 2 men going to greet the plane. Luis says it's one person from the FBI and one from the DA. Everyone agrees that this is the plane. My question is, one of America's most wanted men is being greeted by 2 people. I've seen them arrest white-collar criminals with 20 people and guns out and tactical teams, the whole 9 yards. I've seen more cops on my block for a fight between teenagers. But for a cartel kingpin, 2 actually, it's just 2 guys walking up without weapons drawn. It kind of just doesn't compute.
No, that's a really interesting point. You might know the difference between these 3-letter agencies more than me, but I read somewhere yesterday that this is primarily a Homeland Security investigations, like HSI operation, and apparently that's a bit of a coup for them over the DEA or the FBI. I'm not really sure how all these agencies work with each other, but that was something that I read that might be sort of a little interesting tidbit.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that it wasn't the DEA, so that's actually really interesting. And I'm also I don't know what the MO is right now with this, going after cartel guys, what Homeland Security's involvement is. I haven't really worked with them ever, so I honestly have no idea.
I guess there's tons and tons of people trafficking now, right? That's done by the cartels, so maybe that brings in Homeland Security. I'm not sure.
It's true. To quote Inside Crime here about that, several sources within the U.S. government who had knowledge of the operation but were not authorized to speak on the matter told Inside Crime the pair orchestrated their handover to U.S. authorities. Inside Crime, those guys are very well connected, especially with government officials, to a degree I don't even think the big newspapers can match. And on Luis's Substack he just published, which again, go subscribe, he said he's been in contact with one of El Mayo's grandsons, who said his grandfather was very sick, getting close to the end, and all he wanted was to see his sons Vicente and El Mayo Gordo again, and both are in the U.S. Just to quickly touch on the deals Mayo's kids and brothers have gotten, Vicente and El Mayo's brother were both extradited to the U.S., I believe in 2010 and 2012. Both have been out of prison for a few years already. Someone even snapped a picture of Vicente at a U.S. airport. I think it was Dallas, not that long ago. And Mayo's brother is apparently starting a music career. So yeah, definitely look for that on Spotify when it drops. They really didn't do that much time, all things considering. But again, they did both testify against El Chapo, who was the most wanted man in the world at the time, and someone who the U.S. government really wanted to put away for a long time. There's another El Mayo child, Serafin Zambada. Jeez, this guy's have a lot of kids. Hard keeping track, He was caught with enough weight that his minimum sentence should have been 10 years. But he got sentenced to 5.5 and was out in 4.5 as a high-ranking member of the Sinaloa cartel. Doesn't appear to have testified against anyone, but he also disappeared 3 months into a sentence from the prison database, which could mean, he did provide something of value, needs to be protected. Maybe he's in WITSEC. It's all very, this stuff is not as transparent as you would assume it would be, especially with active investigations going on. This is a kid, too, who his godfathers, when he was born, were Amado Carrillo Fuentes, who was the leader of the Juarez cartel at the time, and Benjamin Arellano Felix, who was the leader of the Tijuana cartel, basically narco royalty. So 4.5 years. But yeah, these guys, they are not staying locked up for long. I don't even think we know where Serafin is right now. I also think there's a good possibility Mayo cut some sort of deal, with him taking of his family. He's old, sickly, near the end, far outlived all his colleagues, probably didn't expect to live this long. And when I say his family, I mean obviously the 3 of the 4 sons have deals, but he also has 4 daughters that aren't in the drug game, but they're working on sort of the financial side of the Zambada family fortune. They have a lot of legitimate businesses at this point, real estate, also I believe some money laundering through those businesses. But normally if these businesses were started with drug money, they could get taken by the government, unless of course there's a deal that allows them to keep some stuff and a whole lot of money. But yeah, there's also reports, I think Luis reported this, that El Mayo's last wish was that the U.S. government state that he didn't turn himself in, to instead say that he was captured or tricked. And as I'm writing this, El Mayo's lawyer just said in court after Luis reported this that, quote, El Mayo did not surrender voluntarily and pleads not guilty to all charges. El Mayo's lawyer also released a statement to the LA Times where he says that El Mayo went to go meet Joaquin with very little security and that 6 guys dressed in military fatigues tied him up, placed a black bag over his head and threw him in the back of a pickup truck where Mayo was tied down on the plane, and then only Joaquin, his pilot, and El Mayo were on the flight. There was a photo of him released where it looked like his wrist was bruised. And he was wearing what looks to be a Hugo Boss shirt, which is irrelevant, but pretty funny to have Mayo caught wearing a shirt that just says boss on it.
Also, like, what is happening with his nose? It's all kind of collapsed. He looks like a Mexican Michael Jackson.
I mean, 76 years old, living that life. Could have been booze, could have been cocaine. Like, who knows? But I don't think what's it called? You're shaming him for his looks. There's a term for that, right?
Yeah. I'm not up on it.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
sure
not
that's cancelable.
It's not very nice, Sean. Not very nice at all. All of this, again, it just kind of sounds ridiculous to me. These guys were the heads of two factions of a Mexican cartel that were not getting along. Now, I'm not a cartel boss, but I don't think you stay alive too long in that world if you assume the other guy is acting in good faith. So yeah, we have U.S. officials feeding to all the major media outlets that Mayo was tricked to getting on this plane. And now the new story is that he was kidnapped and had little security as he's going to meet the heads of the cartel he's currently fighting with, and also someone who has a grudge against him and his family because his brother and son testified against their dad, El Chapo. So, a little song and dance action, a little misdirection, if you ask me. But again, I am speculating without real evidence. And look, listeners of this podcast know I don't usually speculate wildly, or I'm not into conspiratorial thinking with stuff like this. But this whole thing is just messy. I could very well be wrong too. I think hopefully we'll soon find out, but who knows? It would actually make sense for El Mayo to go along with this. Joaquin orchestrated the whole thing story for a few reasons. It's not far-fetched that he would have wanted to help out the Guzman family. He started off very loyal to Chapo for decades. They had the strongest cartel partnership, not including family members. I think the most successful one ever too in the drug world. When Chapo was in prison from 93 to 2001, Mayo kept sending him a lot of money, kept him in the loop, kept him at the top when he didn't have to. They kind of had some antagonism later on after the Sean Penn thing and with the kids testifying. But again, they were arguably the most loyal cartel bosses to each other ever. And this helps out Joaquin. He's definitely getting a good deal. And it likely also helps out the other recently incarcerated Chapo son, Ovido, who was just removed from the prison database for some reason. It says he was released on July 23rd. I think that could mean he was moved to prisons too, or into WITSEC. It could mean switching. There's a lot we don't know. And just as I was saying this, I kind of realized July 23rd was Tuesday. Mayo and Joaquin are arrested on Thursday. So they just happen to move him from prison for security purposes, which is the official story, 2 days before Joaquin and Mayo are in custody. I mean, I don't know. This could be a peace offering for Mayo in a way to the remaining Chapitos and the Mayo faction, now I assume being led by his other, always having remained free son, who is known as Mayo Flaco. Maybe prevents a further war, because it's Monday as we're discussing this, and as far as I know, Sinaloa is not convulsing in bloodshed, which I imagine if Mayo Flaco and the Mayo faction Sinaloa believe Los Chapitos had just set up El Mayo, would be something that would be happening, right? I assume that would mean all out war. Not only would Mayo Flaco want revenge for his dad being tricked and just completely set up and brought to the U.S., but if he didn't do anything, they would look incredibly weak, not just to the other factions of Sinaloa, but to their main rivals, Jalisco New Generacion. So yeah, I mean, let's talk about what the motivations of Joaquin Jr. could be. I think it's pretty obvious. Obviously, he doesn't want to end up in prison forever like his dad and his brother Ovidio, or be killed like his older brother Edgar. So why not cut a sweet deal, do some years, maybe help out his brother Ovidio. One thing that bears mentioning too, I think, in the wake of Los Chapitos essentially building this massive fentanyl empire, the U.S. authorities have gotten much more aggressive. They are pissed, and they are directly gunning for Los Chapitos in a way that, if they were simply moving cocaine and meth, I think would not be the case. I'm sure the heat is on in a way that it hasn't been on before. Joaquin might have just been ready to throw in the towel and work things out as best he could. He's already in too deep to retire in Mexico. The U.S. has this $5 million bounty on his head. And El Mencho and his boys don't care if you're retired, you're still going to be a target. And we know Joaquin Jr. kind of thought he was this smarter, more elevated brother, and this kind of seems like it might be the smart play for him. One important thing to keep in mind, everyone's reporting has not made mention of the Mexican authorities being involved in any of this. In fact, I'm pretty sure they've denied knowledge of it. To quote Reuters one more time, quote, Mexican Security Minister Rosa Rodriguez said that Mexico was informed of the detentions by the U.S. government, but that Mexican authorities did not participate in the operation. And not to get too much into politics, but the current Mexico president, AMLO, no fan of the gringos, and I also imagine a lot of high-level Mexican officials right now are Googling the phrase countries without extradition treaties. Mayo is said to be the most politically connected kingpin in Mexico currently, and maybe in history. You don't avoid arrest for decades without it. And a lot of people who said, well, who would a kingpin like Mayo even have to implicate in terms of said people being a bigger fish? If he wanted to actually cut a deal himself, well, high-level Mexican officials, that could, or military officials, anything, politicians, those could be the people. And I'm sure they're very concerned right now. And, Mexico is always pissed when the U.S. is operating on Mexican soil without really bringing them in. So this is not good for their relations. And if you recall, Mayo got into the trafficking business with his brother-in-law, who had alleged ties to both the CIA and Cuban intelligence and was an extremely shady dude. And Mayo himself, he's also kind of been shrouded in mystery and is quite shady himself. So it would make sense his trafficking career ends in such a shady way.
Yeah, and beyond that, even there's been a lot of talk about Mayo, something that I didn't really know about, actually, being in bed with Russian intelligence in recent years, especially since Russia's been going around the world causing sort of more criminal chaos with underworld groups, be it through the GRU, that's military intel, and then, or the SVR, that's basically the CIA of Russia, or non-state actors like Wagner, I'm not sure how to say that still, which you've done a bunch of stuff on recently. But here's what Van had to say about the potential intel coup from this capture.
And he's also the man who knows where the corpses are among the former and current Mexican government officials, security forces, law enforcement officials. He is potentially a goldmine of information on corruption networks in Mexico. And to me, the most important thing that US law enforcement can get out of him, despite the fact that his arrest will likely trigger a lot of violence, is precisely this intelligence on the Mexican government. Now, separately, El Mayo has been rumored to have connections to Russia. These rumors have increased, especially in the past several years, though no really detailed evidence or even detailed information really has been out there in the public domain. So I don't know whether it's true or not, but I've been hearing that in my trips to Mexico regularly, and increasingly so in the past several years. But if that were the case, I think that would be a good enough reason to try to bring him to the US to prevent any possibility that Russian intelligence establishes connections with him, and more broadly to counter efforts by Russian intelligence to develop networks in Mexico. Since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Russia has been running around Europe, cultivating connections to criminal networks across the continent. Russian intelligence has long used criminal networks for a variety of purposes. But since the invasion of Russia, this has now become much more institutionalized to use various criminal deals and criminal rackets, such as drug trafficking, to generate money for clandestine operations of various Russian intelligence services, and also to use criminal groups for the conduct of sabotage, assassinations, threat operations in Europe. And obviously, Russia would be enormously tempted to mount similar operations in Mexico. 2 years ago, the head of US Northern Command testified in the Congress that there are more Russian intelligence officers in Russia than anywhere else in Latin America, and that there were significant concerns about their espionage activities and potentially of what kind of connections with criminal groups they sought. This had been dismissed by the government of López Obrador, who considers himself a friend and supporter of Putin, who has repeatedly endorsed Putin even despite Putin's egregious invasion of Ukraine. So certainly the presence and freedom of action that Russian intelligence has had in Mexico has been a significant national security concern for the US. And if this were to develop into linkages with criminal groups, that threat would grow even more.
I think, one thing I'm thinking about, and again, I don't know the details here, but I assume El Mayo and Joaquin Jr., definitely Joaquin Jr., have intricate knowledge of fentanyl coming from China and precursors coming from China, and have a lot of information they could potentially give up involving people involved in that from China, people that are trafficking it, people that are making the deals, the go-betweens, the money and all that. And that kind of seems like something the US would prize heavily. I mean, you've done a lot of work on Chinese money laundering and fentanyl stuff. Like, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I actually spoke to a guy last night who was like a forensic accountant, and he was like an attaché back in Beijing, like years and years ago. And he said it's really, really interesting what could fall out from this capture, because I kind of assumed that Chinese and Mexican groups had kind of met each other going way, way back, like going back to like the weed trade and then the meth trade for fentanyl. But he was like, nah, this is shadow banking in China is so massive and everyone uses it so much that it's just an accepted part of legal trade there. So they would have just met Mexican cartel leaders probably through legitimate business in South America and Latin America, and then taken it from there because the cartels are so kind of all-encompassing. So this could be like a really, really, really big deal if the US wants to. I mean, there's a political question of if it can really do this, because it would cause so much problems, but whether it wants to kind of tie Chinese legitimate trade directly with the state to the illegal kind of precursor flow. And that would be massive. And Mayo definitely will know where the sort of bodies are with all of that stuff. But that's kind of $1 million question, right? Because if they really want to stop fentanyl, you've got to stop the stuff getting into Latin America, and they cannot do that at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, if Joaquin Jr. was this CFO type that he's being portrayed as, the money guy, he's going to have some information too, because they were heavily, Los Chapitos were heavily involved in fentanyl. They were kind of, I think, the biggest players almost. So he's gonna have some interesting things that he could potentially give up to get that deal shortened. Everyone seems to agree, the no deal people and the deal truthers like us, that this is going to change nothing actually in the drug cartel world in terms of stuff coming in. Though it kind of sounds like maybe it potentially could have an effect on fentanyl. They kind of think, I think most people sort of think both factions of the Sinaloa cartel will be somewhat okay. Iban's the top dog in the Chapitos, and Jesus Alfredo too. They seem to be in firm control of their faction. And while they took some heavy hits as of late, they still seem to be chugging along. And the Mayo faction, which presumably people would think would be more at risk since their legendary leader is now out of the game, seems to be like it could be okay as well. As we said above, Mayo had stepped away from the day-to-day operations for the last couple of years to leave Mayo Flaco and some highly trusted lieutenants in charge. And apparently the Mayo faction of the Sinaloa cartel has a deep roster of experienced people ready to take the reins. But again, if this actually was a situation where it was a setup, Mayo was essentially tricked by a Chapito, and like I could foresee some sort of bloody war between those two factions, because that's not something that that they could abide by. Now, just a little bit on Mayo Flaco, who is basically taking control of his faction of the cartel, of Mayo's faction. Much like his dad, information on him is extremely scarce. Even on cartel rumor websites, there's not that much on him. There's information from a 2015 federal indictment, and according to the DEA, he was in charge of drug smuggling from Asia for the cartel. He also apparently likes fancy cars because the DEA confiscated 2 Lambos and McLaren and some other stuff from him, but I'm sure they all like that sort of stuff. But yeah, much like his dad, he's keeping it extremely low profile. So yeah, this could be a situation where, you know, it's just kind of like a symbolic arrest. You get the top dogs and not much changes. But like we said, it could go the other way. If they're going to be giving up stuff about Chinese precursors, money laundering with those guys, the money trade, all the fentanyl stuff, I mean, that could really play things out. Either way, this is kind of like a feather in the cap for the U.S. law enforcement agencies that were involved. Everyone involved, you know, they're going to use these arrests to advance their career. They look great. They're part of this historic arrest they can dine out on forever. And I don't know if you guys have heard, there's an election going on in the U.S. Sean, have you?
No.
Yeah. So, you know,
we don't really get much about it.
Yeah. So fentanyl, I mean, that's a huge issue. That's definitely going to be a heavy attack line on the current administration, the border too. So this kind of gives them maybe some leverage to counter those attacks.
Yeah, it's all about narrative, right? On the political side. And it's like you saw Merrick Garland coming out with this grandiose stuff about, like, you know, half an hour after they made the arrest. But it's pretty politically hard to pass. I mean, like, you'd think Morena, which is the left-wing populist party of AMLO, and his successor recently won their election there, Claudia Sheinbaum, you think they would be more comfortable dealing with a Democrat White House, and not just because their ideology is closer, right? Border crossings were at their highest under the last Trump presidency, and the thinking in most quarters in Mexico, from what I've read, is that the Democrats are more likely to work with counterparts in Mexico City rather than against them, and trying to get crossings and drug crime down. But like, I'm not saying whether that works better. I'm just saying that's pretty much how it's viewed. And then you'd think that the timing of this arrest is useful for the Democratic campaign. Like you said, it's the direct counter to the soft on crime attacks that Kamala Harris is going to come under. But there was a lot of, you know, it's worth mentioning that actually this sort of happened before a little bit. Like, there was a lot of cooperation between Obama and Peña Nieto in 2016 when El Chapo was arrested. That was just a few months before that year's election that Hillary Clinton was widely expected to win, but of course didn't. But then this year has seen a DEA probe into links between cartels and AMLO's administration. And like Vander said before, El Mayo really, really knows where the bodies are buried in terms of corrupt officials and state leaders. So the Mexican government is claiming it knows nothing about the arrests, like you said before. So political speculation is, I think it's just all going a little bit too far at this stage. I mean, we could just come out with the same old tinfoil stuff about Clintons and Pelosi's and whatnot that other podcasts have done from what I've seen. But yeah, I don't know. This is all like super, super fresh. And there is tons and tons of political stuff going on behind this this arrest, but it's probably best to see how things pan out in the next week or two, right?
Yeah, and then to be fair, I know we are speculating a bit here too, but I think that speculation is grounded in reality. And coming just as we're about to record, another frequent guest on the podcast and someone I always look to make sense of cartel stuff, anything criminal in Mexico really, Owen Grillo. He just published a new report, I believe, on his Substack. It kind of throws the turning himself in theory out the window. I'll just read the opening paragraph of it. It's on his Substack. Again, another that you should definitely subscribe to if you want to stay up to date on all this stuff. Quote, the drug lord El Mayo was lured to a meeting in Sinaloa state capital, Culiacan, that was supposed to be with Joaquin Guzman Lopez as an envoy of the Chapitos cartel faction and a prominent Sinaloan politician. Mayo came from a hideout in the mountains of Durango to Culiacan about a week earlier to see doctors about a cancer he is suffering from, and then went to the rendezvous. Grillo describes an ambush and that Mayo did have bodyguards who may have been killed, and cites as the source a former member of Mayo's security who was incarcerated. Mayo was then driven to the airport, loaded up and flown to the U.S. The source also told Grillo that U.S. agents were at the house where the ambush took place. So again, you know, take everything with a grain of salt. Owen says to do that as well. This is a wild one. It's kind of, I think, you know, in between the tricking him just to get on a plane and what we were saying that, well, I guess not even in between, but this seems believable to me as well. I don't know if U.S. agents would be on the ground there. That seems a little wild for them to do, especially in the age of social media. So it's unverified. Adding to it, Grillo says that a Sinaloan politician, that one who was supposed to be at the meeting with El Mayo, hours after the capture, he was ambushed and killed, which means, like I talked about earlier, there has already been some retaliation from Mayo's faction. If this is true, what we're hearing here, I think the bloodshed is only getting started. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many questions right now. We're going to try to keep up on this. I think we'll try to get Luis to talk. Maybe we'll try to get Owen to talk, those guys.
Yeah, for sure.
And we've got that Vander Feldbar-Brown, that interview going up on the Patreon, patreon.com/theunderworldpodcast, Spotify, iTunes as well. You can subscribe. And yeah, this one, we're a little all over the places.
So this is love.
Ismael El Mayo Zambada, el narco y ex socio del Chapo Guzmán, se encontraría en la frontera de Durango y también de Sinaloa. Según las autoridades, el Mayo está enfermo, pero hay lo que falta todo un ejército de sus hombres.
When you talk about the Sinaloa cartel today, you can't not talk about Los Chapitos, El Chapo's already infamous sons. They're as brutal as their incarcerated father, and they have expanded his blood empire to unprecedented levels. But some people say El Mayo is the real leader of the Sinaloa. After all, El Mayo has been by El Chapo's side for half a century, and the Sinaloa cartel would practically not exist without him. So the latest reports on his poor health could mean a huge blow to the sinister cartel.
El fin del Mayo Zambada está cerca. Según la DEA, los figurantes de salud tienen en aprietos al capo que por años le ha huido a las autoridades.
La DEA menciona que Ismael El Mayo Zambada es insulino dependiente. Esto quiere decir que padece de diabetes. La edad les alcanza.
Is Mayo really that sick? Will the man who evaded capture for 60 plus years be finally caught? And would his death mean Los Chapitos can take his branch of the Sinaloa cartel, or that the cartel is finally coming to an end? Let's dive in. Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the elusive and powerful leader of the Sinaloa cartel, has evaded capture for decades. Born on January 1st, 1948 in Sinaloa, Mexico, his life is shrouded in mystery. And it's this extreme level of privacy that has kept him out of prison for so long. Unlike his infamous partner, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, El Mayo has never been caught or spent a day in prison. Think about that for a second. One of the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most powerful and most destructive criminal organizations in the world, and he has not been arrested once. El Mayo has managed to stay under the radar all this time, using his cunning and strategic mind to maintain control over vast drug trafficking operations. El Mayo's early life was marked by extreme poverty, similar to El Chapo or El Mencha. As a child, he worked various odd jobs to help support his family. By his teens, he was already involved in farming opium poppies, which would pave the way for his entry into the drug trade. His rise began in the 1960s, when the demand for marijuana in the United States was soaring. El Mayo quickly recognized the potential and expanded into the international narcotics trade with the help of his mentor, Inez Calderon Quintero. By the 1970s, El Mayo had established himself as a reliable figure in the drug trade, trafficking and white powder into the U.S. His partnership with Antonio Cruz Vasquez further solidified his position. Under Vasquez's guidance, El Mayo learned the intricacies of the drug trade, including the importance of alliances, logistics, and above all, maintaining a low profile. In the 1980s, the Mexican drug trade became more organized and violent. El Mayo joined the ranks of the Guadalajara cartel, led by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, also known as El Padrino. Now, the Guadalajara cartel is considered the first modern-day cartel, with collaboration with Colombia, expanded smuggling routes, and U.S. connections. For El Mayo, this meant something else too: the beginning of his association with El Chapo. Chapo would later become his partner in the Sinaloa cartel. These two were a match made in hell. El Chapo had that terrifying knack for violence and ruthlessness, and Mayo had an insatiable lust for power that motivated him to ever expand and become powerful, like the Guadalajara had never been before. El Mayo's strategic mind and ability to stay out of the spotlight allowed him to survive and even thrive in the brutal world of drug trafficking. Unlike El Chapo, who sought fame and notoriety, El Mayo valued secrecy and discretion. This approach proved effective as he managed to evade capture while continuing to grow his empire. For many years, his name was on the DEA list, but they had nothing more on him. However, recent reports indicate that El Mayo's health is failing. Now in his 70s, he is reportedly suffering from diabetes, gout, and other health issues.
La DEA menciona que Ismael El Mayo Zambada es insulino dependiente. Esto quiere decir que padece de diabetes. La edad les alcanza.
This super fresh news from June 2024 mentions yet another bombshell claim.
Recientemente también un testigo protegido de la DEA declara la presunta muerte de Nemesio Ceguera Cervantes y se cruzan estos dos informes, ¿no? Por un lado, esto se trata de una filtración, la que revela la presunta muerte del Mencho, y por este lado ya es un informe de manera oficial.
Indeed, there are reports that El Mencho, the infamous leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, might have passed away. This would not be the first time such reports surfaced. In late 2020, it was reported that Mencho was suffering from kidney disease and had constructed his own hospital in a village called El Alcihuatl to receive treatment. By December 2023, reports indicated that he had experienced kidney failure. As a result, he is now confined to his home hospital and depends on others to manage his cartel. In February 2022, unconfirmed and troubling rumors surfaced in Colima. Jose Bernabe Brizuela Meraz, also known as La Vaca, and his cartel in Colima left several messages known as narco mantas. These banners throughout the city claimed that El Mencho was dead. La Vaca, once a devoted follower of Mencho, deserted the cartel, believing Mencho was no longer alive. When drug lords start abandoning their posts, it shows a loss of trust in the major cartels. In other words, it's likely La Vaca was telling the truth.
So with all the rumors around El Mencho being dead or very ill or out of the cartel, that started, I guess this started like around 2020 when we started reading about El Mencho being out of the cartel Jalisco. I reached out to two little bench commanders inside the Jalisco Operación. One of them believed that he was just literally just out of the cartel, which means like he's well, he's alive, he's just like stepped out of the cartel. And the other guy believes that El Mencho was pretty ill or might even be dead.
The lack of clarity around these claims goes to show that, like El Mayo, El Mencho is keeping a super low profile, or was keeping a low profile.
Además, el problema de diabetes, el mayo estaría presentando una complicación en sus articulaciones por la enfermedad denominada gota.
These ailments have forced him to rely on a team of medical professionals and loyal followers to ensure his safety and prolong his life. Despite his deteriorating condition, El Mayo remains a significant figure in the Sinaloa cartel, commanding respect and loyalty from his thousands of followers. El Mayo is a wanted man with a $15 million reward on his head. He was first indicted by the Mexican government in 1998, and in 2003, U.S. authorities also indicted him. El Mayo has never been incarcerated, even though his right-hand man Chapo was arrested and sentenced to prison 3 times. The first 2 times, he escaped Mexican prison using a mix of bribery and connections. The third time, the U.S. government insisted he should be extradited to do prison in the States. He would not get out of that one, no matter how much he offered to bribe the warden. El Chapo was arrested for the final time in 2016. In 2018, he faced charges in the U.S. as the leader of the Sinaloa cartel. On February 12, 2019, El Chapo was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life plus 30 years. He was also fined millions of dollars, which pales in comparison to the Sinaloa cartel's annual earnings. This time, El Chapo's defense took a different approach. His lawyers claimed that El Chapo was not the mastermind behind the cartel. Instead, they argued that El Mayo had been the true leader all along, with El Chapo being portrayed almost as a victim of El Mayo's manipulative control. El Chapo alleged that El Mayo manipulated evidence, bribed officials in both Mexico and the U.S., and influenced the police to ensure El Chapo's conviction, effectively sacrificing him to protect himself.
Chapo Guzman's lead lawyer said that the world was focusing on this mythical El Chapo creature when the real monster is highly controlling this case externally, Mayo Zambada.
Did El Mayo frame El Chapo in a final move to secure his position as the cartel's kingpin? Or was this merely a defense strategy to try and reduce El Chapo's prison sentence? As El Mayo's health declines, questions arise about the future of the Sinaloa cartel. The cartel's horizontal leadership structure means that power is shared among several leaders, including El Chapo's sons, known as Los Chapitos. This division of power has prevented major conflicts within the cartel, but the potential death of El Mayo could disrupt this delicate balance. Los Chapitos, the sons of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, have emerged as powerful figures within the Sinaloa cartel.
Judy, they are known as Los Chapitos, the 4 most trusted sons of the world's most notorious drug kingpin. As the I-Team has reported for several years, federal drug investigators here in Chicago consider El Chapo's sons in charge of the Sinaloa cartel. It remains this area's largest trafficker of cocaine and methamphetamines.
Ivan Archibaldo Guzman, Jesus Alfredo Guzman, and Ovido Guzman are the key players in this new generation of leadership. They have learned brutality and ruthlessness from their dad and are poised to take control of the cartel in the event of El Mayo's death. Ivan Archibaldo Guzman, also known as El Chapito, is the oldest of the 3 brothers. He has been involved in the drug trade from a young age, learning the ropes from his father. Ivan is known for his strategic mind and ability to forge alliances with other criminal organizations. His leadership style is similar to El Mayo's, emphasizing negotiation and discretion over violence. Jesus Alfredo Guzman, the middle brother, is also deeply involved in the cartel's operations. He is known for his operational expertise and logistical skills, coordinating drug shipments and managing the cartel's finances. Jesus Alfredo is seen as a stabilizing force within the cartel, ensuring that operations run smoothly even in times of crisis. Ovido Guzman, the youngest of the 3, has gained notoriety in recent years. His attempted arrest in 2019 led to a violent confrontation between cartel gunmen and Mexican security forces, known as the Culiacan Nazo. The incident highlighted the Guzman family's power and influence, as well as their willingness to use violence to protect their interests. In a desperate attempt to stop the bloodshed, former President Andrés Manuel López Obrador ordered Ovido's release from prison. At the time, many people commented the same thing. That sends the message that cartels are in charge of the country, not the government.
We've seen in the last 20 years is some of the cartels have become much more powerful. So it becomes the cartels actually bullying and controlling elements of the security forces.
At the beginning of 2023, though, Ovido was finally arrested in his hometown, just outside Culiacan, Sinaloa. He was hiding in plain sight in Jesus Maria, where all the locals knew him, yet refused to turn him in. This just goes to show how popular Los Chapitos are, despite the horrors that they do every day. Being loved and protected by the people, despite removing people's heads on camera, is another form of power. Los Chapitos feel untouchable.
The Mexican president has defended the military operation that captured a drug cartel leader, Ovido Guzman, the son of jailed drug trafficker El Chapo. Violence erupted in Culiacan, a stronghold of the cartel. At least 19 members of the Sinaloa cartel and 10 members of the military were killed.
Ovidio's arrest led to another massacre, even worse than the 2019 one.
These criminal organizations shot with weapons at aircraft from Mexican Air Force and from commercial airlines, and at the international Culiacan airport facilities. Nevertheless, they did not achieve their goal of rescuing the alleged offender because we neutralized him.
However, this time, he was kept in prison, then extradited to the United States to face a similar fate as his father, life imprisonment at one of the country's toughest federal prisons.
We regret the loss of lives of those who died while carrying out their jobs. We also regret other losses.
Los Chapitos have managed to maintain a delicate balance of power within the Sinaloa cartel, working alongside El Mayo's faction. This cooperation has allowed the cartel to continue its operations without major internal conflicts. However, the potential death of El Mayo could change this dynamic, leading to a power struggle between the two factions. Ivan, Jesus, and Joaquin Jr. are still leading a faction of the cartel, and they are certainly aware of El Mayo's declining health, and they're not famous for their empathy. Despite their youth, Los Chapitos have proven themselves to be capable leaders. They have expanded the cartel's operations, forging new alliances, and increasing their influence both within Mexico and internationally. Their ability to adapt to changing circumstances and maintain control over their territories has solidified their position within the cartel.
El campo tiene bajo su mando más de 17 estados de México, entre esos Tepic, Nayarit y Toluca.
Actualmente él es uno de los liderazgos del cártel de Sinaloa, pero el cártel de Sinaloa tiene una estructura de liderazgo horizontal. Entonces esto hace que no solamente tenga un líder, sino que se comparten los liderazgos. Además de la facción del Mayo Zambada, que es el Mayo Zambada, se comparte el liderazgo por los Chapitos, que son los hijos de el Chapo.
The transition of power from El Mayo to Los Chapitos could mark a new era for the Sinaloa cartel. The brothers have shown that they are willing to use violence when necessary, but they also understand the importance of strategic alliances and negotiation. This approach could help them maintain control over the cartel and continue its operations even after El Mayo's death. But before we go on, let us not glorify these guys. The Sinaloa cartel, like other
Chapo's son, Joaquin Guzman Lopez, and Mexican drug lord Ismael Zambada are now in U.S. custody, both arrested yesterday after landing in a private plane in New Mexico. NBC4's Rob Kabasik live in the newsroom with more on this major arrest. Robert.
And let's talk, Colleen, about why the federal government says this is a major arrest. The U.S. government estimates there were well over 107,000 overdose deaths in the United States last year. The majority of those deaths, close to 75,000, blamed on fentanyl. Fentanyl, made in Mexico, shipped to the U.S. by a cartel with two of their leaders now in custody. In the words of Attorney General Merrick Garland tonight, they are behind one of the most violent and powerful drug trafficking organizations in the entire world. They got him, two men surrendering to authorities without incident when a private plane landed at a small airport in New Mexico, just minutes away from El Paso. Late tonight, the Justice Department whisking the arrested pair out of the airport, where they will soon face multiple charges. It's a big arrest for the feds, and the hope it will have big implications for the synthetic drug epidemic in the U.S. The government blaming the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels of being at the heart of the crisis. The Sinaloa cartel was run by notorious drug lord El Chapo Guzman, who is now serving life in prison. In custody now, 76-year-old Zambada Garcia, El Mayo, who is said to have co-founded the Sinaloa cartel with El Chapo, helping to run the criminal organization for 3 decades. The DEA said tonight he was one of their most wanted fugitives, offering a $15 million reward. Now, the arrest of El Mayo strikes at the heart of the cartel that is responsible for the majority of drugs, including fentanyl and methamphetamine, killing Americans from coast to coast. With El Chapo behind bars, his sons inherited his drug trafficking empire, and on that plane that landed in the U.S. today, one of those sons, Joaquin Guzman Lopez, who was wanted for $5 million. The DEA says his arrest is another enormous blow to the Sinaloa cartel. In 2017, he and his brothers, the Chapitos, allegedly took control of the Sinaloa cartel after El Chapo was extradited to the United States. Last year, the two major Mexican cartels said they were stopping trafficking fentanyl, and the DEA says the Chapitos made a public show about it. But the supply of fentanyl has not decreased, according to the government, and the DEA dismissing the supposed ban of fentanyl as nothing more than a publicity stunt. So at this point, when it comes to the Chapitos, those four sons of El Chapo, there is now a total of 2 in custody. 2 other sons have not been apprehended. And you may be wondering, Colleen, why did today's arrest finally happen? The Wall Street Journal is quoting Mexican and U.S. officials reporting tonight that a high-ranking member of the Sinaloa cartel tricked El Mayo and El Chapo's son into flying to Texas. We checked the flight.
All right, the targets of Donald Trump's ire across the country and around the world are scrambling to prepare for what happens after he retakes office. That includes the mullahs of Iran and, of course, the cartels of Mexico. Mass deportations and military force against the cartels are just 2 things that Donald Trump has promised during his campaign. And with that comes the concern that the cartels will try to use the opportunity between now and Inauguration Day to kill as many people as they can across the border.
It's Donald Trump versus the fugitive Lord El Chapo. The presidential candidate is in an international war of words with the infamous Mexican gangster.
Behind bars in a U.S. supermax prison, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman remains as defiant as ever as he issues a disturbing message to President-elect Donald Trump over his fierce plan to bring an end to the cartels.
Our country is being poisoned from within by the drugs and by all of the other crime that's taking place. The drug cartels are waging war in America, and it's now time for America to wage war on the cartels.
The former kingpin of Mexico's Sinaloa cartel used to wage terror across multiple different nations, but today, in the wake of the recent election, it might be El Chapo's turn to be terrified. El Chapo has been rotting away behind bars since he was first extradited to the U.S. in 2017 to face justice for decades of violent-related crimes. He is currently serving a life sentence in one of the toughest, most high-security prisons in the entire world. But even in his absence and the capture of 2 of his Lord sons, the Sinaloa cartel has remained in power. However, due to the November 5th re-election of President Donald Trump, that could soon change.
The Fox News decision desk can now officially project that Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States.
The former president's comeback will be complete with a win in Wisconsin, a state that he narrowly lost 4 years ago. He is now the 2nd president in U.S. history to win non-consecutive terms.
It was clear in El Chapo's expression when he was first captured that nearly every last shred of hope for his freedom had run out. He would be living out the rest of his days in some of the worst conditions imaginable, in a prison saved for only the worst of the worst monsters to roam the earth.
This just released footage of El Chapo shows the drug lord looking teary-eyed and in shock after he was flown to New York. He now faces a life sentence at Supermax prison in Colorado, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Its infamous inmates include the Boston Marathon bomber, the Unabomber, and the shoe bomber who tried to bring down a plane. Cells are small at Supermax. The furniture is made of stone, not metal.
In the years since his time behind bars, El Chapo has frequently complained of mistreatment. He has sent multiple letters to U.S. and Mexican authorities claiming he has suffered abuse. This has supposedly included severe psychological torment, inhumane conditions, minimal sunlight, limited outdoor time, and extreme isolation. He believes that prison officials are forcing him to endure these things to punish him for his previous escapes. Considering his past, it's hard to imagine why El Chapo would expect anything less.
He will be in a cell about 23 hours a day. He'll have cameras all over him.
You'll remember this surveillance video of El Chapo escaping through a tunnel dug under his prison cell in Mexico in 2015. No such luck with Supermax. It's built into solid rock.
Even more recently, Guzman's lawyer has pleaded on his behalf, claiming that the kingpin's severe confinement is starting to cause his mental and physical health to deteriorate. El Chapo is reportedly only allowed outside 3 times per week in a small enclosed area with no sunlight. But this is only the beginning of El Chapo's recent allegations of abuse. His lawyer also claims that El Chapo has been deprived of medical care, nutritious food, and proper dental treatment. In a particularly disturbing allegation, his lawyer stated that instead of addressing dental issues, prison authorities forcibly removed his molars to prevent having to deal with further complaints from him. He has reportedly also been denied exercise on the rooftop courts due to security concerns that he might escape, either by helicopter or sniper aid. El Chapo suspects that all of these extra severe precautions are because U.S. officials fear he is going to escape, and according to recent reports, he is most likely right.
Rob, the El Chapo escape fears are not unfounded. He tunneled out of the last Mexican prison where he was locked up and rode to freedom on an underground motorcycle. That was his second escape. Tonight, the I-Team has a letter from El Chapo in which he implies that U.S. prison officials are bullying him because he has escaped before. Nobody's ever broken out of the Supermax prison here in Colorado since opening in 1994, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. This airtight penitentiary has housed the worst of the worst, including billionaire cartel kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, like the rest here, segregated and on permanent lockdown 23 hours a day.
In a letter El Chapo wrote to the U.S. judge who sentenced him to a lifetime behind bars, he claims that prison authorities continue to use his past escapes against him, even now.
In this English translation filed today and obtained by the I-Team, Chapo says prison authorities are preventing him from receiving attorney documents for new court motions. They always use the excuse that it's because Guzman fled from a Mexican prison, he writes. This is a ridiculous claim used to justify the anomalies.
Despite the severity of his crimes, El Chapo claims that his human rights will continue to be violated for as long as he remains in custody in the United States. El Chapo has made it clear that he is not seeking release from prison, but is instead requesting to be sent back to Mexico, where he expects that he would be granted better living conditions and access to medical care.
El Chapo has been on a crusade since arriving at the Supermax in Colorado to communicate with his attorneys and allow them to deliver documents to his prison cell as he works to concoct a legal move that would result in his unlikely release.
In a letter he directed to Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, El Chapo requested transfer on humanitarian grounds. Guzman argues that he would be able to serve his sentence in better conditions while being closer to his family, easing his isolation. His legal team insists that his request is not for freedom, but rather for more humane treatment. However, any hope that El Chapo had to return home to Mexico has likely been destroyed in the news that Trump defeated Vice President Kamala Harris in the race to become the 47th president of the United States. Harris and Trump made it clear during their campaigns that they had vastly different viewpoints on how the United States should move forward in securing the U.S.-Mexico border and fighting back against the cartels. Harris focused more on collaboration with neighboring countries like Mexico to combat crime and disrupt cartel operations. She also promised that as president, she would work on addressing the root causes of migration from Central America, aiming to reduce poverty, corruption, and violence in countries like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. But as many of her rivals pointed out, what did Kamala Harris actually do to fight against the cartels during the last nearly 4 years as the vice president of the United States?
I fought against the cartels who and human beings, who threaten the security of our border and the safety of our communities. And I will tell you, these fights were not easy.
Despite Kamala's claims that she's fought back fiercely against the Sinaloa cartel and other related criminal gangs, it seems that there is little evidence that she took any action against these groups during her time in office.
All right, we've investigated. We can't find one thing that she's done directly to harm the Mexican cartels. Not one. Not in California, not as vice president, not as a senator. Now, if you know one, my staff's pretty damn good. All right? We can't find any.
Vice President Harris spent a lot of time talking about her big plans for fighting back against the cartels. This has been an extremely hot political issue in the United States in recent years. After all, hundreds of thousands of Americans have lost their lives to fentanyl being smuggled across the border from cartels, just like the one that El Chapo once led. However, according to reports from her presidency, she never once took any actual steps towards fighting back against the cartels.
As vice president, she created a dialogue about smuggling. With whom? We can't find out. What did that dialogue lead to? Nobody knows. So she took them on. How?
Keeping this history in mind, El Chapo may have had hopes that as president of the United States, Kamala would have not only been more lenient towards the cartel, but lenient towards him as well. Maybe even lenient enough to let him return home to Mexico. Now, it seems, he can say goodbye to that dream for at least the foreseeable future. Donald Trump has made his opinions not only on illegal immigration, but the fight against the cartel very clear. His plan is not just to fight back against the Sinaloa cartel, but to destroy them and all criminal gangs that have threatened the safety of the United States and its citizens. While he was president, Trump's administration made high-profile efforts to designate cartels as terrorist organizations. He also
And remember, in Mexico alone, an estimated 100,000 civilians have been tragically murdered or gone missing at the hands of these cartels. When I'm back in the White House, the drug kingpins and vicious traffickers will never sleep soundly again. We did it once, and we did it better than anybody else. There's never been a better border than we had just 2 years ago. The strongest border, in fact, in the history of our country. And drugs were at a low of 45 years. There's been nothing like what we did just.
Welcome to SDI's Mexican Cartel series. In this video, we'll be exploring the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, providing you with essential information about their operations, history, and impact. Brief history and origins. The CJNG emerged in 2010 following the fragmentation of the Milenio cartel, founded by Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho. The group quickly established itself as a dominant force in Mexico's criminal landscape. Content reference 0 index 0. Initially, the CJNG operated as an armed wing of the Sinaloa cartel, known as Los Mata Zetas, targeting the rival Zetas cartel. However, after the death of Sinaloa leader Ignacio Coronel Villarreal in 2010, the CJNG declared its independence, aiming to control territories in Jalisco and neighboring states. Leadership and organizational structure. Under El Mencho's leadership, the CJNG developed a hierarchical structure with regional commanders overseeing various territories. The cartel employs paramilitary tactics and sophisticated communication networks, enabling efficient coordination of its illicit activities. Content reference. Index 2. El Mencho's leadership style is characterized by strategic alliances and ruthless enforcement. He has maintained control through a combination of bribery, intimidation, and violence, ensuring loyalty within the organization and compliance from local authorities. Areas of operation and influence. Initially based in Jalisco, the CJNG has expanded its influence across Mexico, with significant presence in states such as Michoacán, Colima, and Veracruz. Internationally, the cartel has extended its operations to the United States, Europe, and Asia, highlighting its global reach. The CJNG's expansion strategy involves aggressive territorial takeovers, often engaging in violent confrontations with rival cartels and local law enforcement. Their international operations include drug trafficking routes that supply narcotics to various countries, establishing the CJNG as a significant player in the global drug trade. Major criminal activities. The CJNG is heavily involved in drug trafficking, particularly methamphetamine and fentanyl production and distribution. Additionally, the cartel engages in arms trafficking, money laundering, and violent enforcement tactics to maintain control over its territories. Beyond drug trafficking, the CJNG has diversified its criminal portfolio to include extortion, kidnapping, and oil theft. These activities not only generate substantial revenue, but also serve to exert control over local economies and populations. Notable events or conflicts. In 2015, the CJNG gained international attention after shooting down a Mexican military helicopter, resulting in multiple fatalities. This act demonstrated the cartel's willingness to directly confront state forces. The CJNG has also been involved in violent turf wars with rival groups, notably the Sinaloa cartel, contributing to significant instability in various regions. Another significant event occurred in 2018 when the CJNG was linked to a grenade attack on the U.S. consulate in Guadalajara. While no injuries were reported, the incident underscored the cartel's capacity to target international interests. Current status and future outlook. As of 2024, the CJNG remains one of Mexico's most powerful and violent criminal organizations. Despite the arrest of key figures, including El Mencho's son, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, known as El Menchito, the cartel continues to adapt and maintain its operations. Ongoing efforts by Mexican and international authorities aim to dismantle the CJNG's networks, but the group's resilience poses ongoing challenges. The CJNG's future trajectory will likely depend on several factors, including law enforcement effectiveness, internal cohesion, and competition from rival cartels. While leadership arrests have disrupted operations, the cartel's decentralized structure allows it to continue functioning despite such setbacks. Impact on local communities.
My old job didn't have room to grow, so I looked into a cybersecurity degree from WGU. Cybersecurity jobs are
In recent months, Americans across the country have been getting a series of strange phone calls that have, unbeknownst to them, put them in direct contact with one of the most dangerous criminal enterprises on the planet, the CJNG cartel. Each of these unsuspecting Americans have one thing in common. They own a timeshare in a resort town in Mexico. But as the infamous criminal group, who also goes by the name the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, has not only expanded its territory outside of the Jalisco state, it's also diversified its business operations outside of the world of smuggling. In fact, it now operates an elaborate scam targeting Americans that is more profitable than drug running, and there's almost nothing law enforcement can do to stop it. Before we get into the scam itself, first it's important to get some background information on the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, also known as the CJNG. The group started as an offshoot of the Sinaloa cartel, arguably the most powerful cartel in Mexico, but under the leadership of the mysterious El Mencho, whose real name is the Mesio of Seguera Cervantes. They've gone to war with the Sinaloa cartel and anyone else who threatens to get in the way. Operating out of a remote compound, El Mencho uses his hyper-militarized private armies to enforce their brutal brand of narco rule.
Now, a new and even more dangerous player has entered the scene, El Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, or CJNG.
When they come into an area, they really come in really hard and heavy, meaning they will go in and start on a killing spree.
Polo Ruiz, Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Drug Enforcement Administration in Arizona, says the CJNG is ruthless in their quest for money and power. They now control 24 of Mexico's 32 states with the firepower to back it up.
But what really sets them apart is their ruthless mode of doing business.
So with the Jalisco cartel, for example, everybody knows about the hyper-violence. Everybody knows about El Mencho being hidden away in his hidey hole in Jalisco cartel for the last 10 years. Everybody knows about their battles with Sinaloa all across Mexico.
What people didn't know, was what we try to address in the book, is they have a unique modus operandi. They're a completely unique cartel. It's never been seen before in Mexico.
That's investigative journalist Chris Dalby. Chris Dalby is the author of CJNG, A Quick Guide to Mexico's Deadliest Cartel, and currently the director of the World of Crime think tank.
They don't do business sustainably, right? They draw every drop of blood from a rock in the areas they control. And that was out there. You had reports on them exploiting the tequila industry or the cattle industry or the avocados most famously. When you put it together, you have an economic extortion map that's never been seen in Mexico. I mean, they willingly drive people out of business and then replace them with their operatives, right? They're not looking for a sustainable status quo like the Sinaloa cartel mostly.
Though they started by trafficking and selling drugs, the CJNG launched elaborate offshoots in an effort to diversify their earnings.
When you look at a cartel, you can't just look at a cartel as a bunch of hyped up drug traffickers, right? Cartels have different specialities. People within them have different jobs, and it all contributes to a very profitable enterprise, like a multinational company, right? Why is McDonald's the franchise that it is today? If you look at McDonald's, you have to study its history, the way it expanded, the economic climate in America and in the world that allowed that expansion. It's the same with the Jalisco cartel. The Jalisco cartel begins in the hills of Michoacan with a family of avocado farmers called the Valencia. The Valencia at the time are these very wealthy, they control huge tracts of land, and they begin to diversify in the 70s into marijuana and then into opium popping. But they're not interested in being a cartel at the time, or they haven't thought about that. They're just selling their marijuana, they're selling their poppy to bigger groups in the north of Mexico, right? They're middlemen, so to speak, they're wholesalers. Progressively over time, they get more ambitious, they get wealthier, they get the connections to begin operating as a cartel, to move their own drugs into the US. After the fall of the Guadalajara cartel, so what happens, they're on the west coast of Mexico, they have control of ports. Pablo Escobar comes calling and says, hey, I need new partners to help me move my cocaine into the US, right? So they're the second generation of Mexico traffickers that moves cocaine into the US. What does that allow them to do? To diversify, to start setting up US operations, to start setting up money laundering operations. That anchors the next stage of the cartel, where they become this national player. I'll spare you 20 years of Game of Thrones back and forth and power struggles within Mexico. That's 3 chapters of the book. But they end up subservient to the Sinaloa cartel. They end up with, they lose their territory in Michoacan, they're forced into exile to the north, and they go to work for El Chapo. Power struggles within the Sinaloa cartel. El Mencho comes to the fore as this very ambitious, hyper-violent narco who was in California in the 80s during the meth boom. And suddenly he goes, well, hang on a second, there's a big hole in Mexico for synthetic drugs. There's no one in Mexico that has our knowledge of how to make meth, later fentanyl, and that has our control of Pacific ports, that has our knowledge of drug trafficking routes to the US. So they become the synthetic experts, right? They're not born from this generation of CJNG leaders doesn't have the connections to the marijuana and the opium. They're pure synthetic ones. They go back into marijuana and opium, of course, because that's where all the money is. But they really become the first synthetic drug experts, right? And then they seem to see Mexico as Napoleon would see a map of Europe. They see a land ripe for conquest. And so they move into states almost in a military fashion, right? They'll put up narco banners in half a dozen to a dozen municipalities, identifying by name the local criminals that can either get in line or get shot. And then they will act on that promise and they'll take over that state. That's a way of expanding that Mexico had never seen before. The legacy of that is 80% of all cartel murders in the last 10 years were either committed by or done to the Jalisco cartel. That's an astonishing statistic in a country where there's so many criminal groups. They're connected to 80% of the cartel violence in the last 10 years.
As the CJNG expanded its territory, it also expanded its business model, moving from trafficking drugs to elaborate criminal enterprises that involve everything from theft and extortion to human trafficking. And if the cartel recruited new business partners who didn't want to participate in their crime, they took violent action to ensure the next recruits wouldn't make the same decision. Border Agent Chief Victor Manjarres witnessed their expansion and violent tactics firsthand as power shifted from the Sinaloa cartel to the CJNG.
Since then, the dynamics for the Mexican cartels have changed quite a bit. On that, so when you look at the Sinaloa cartel, often known as one of the meanest, most violent, little bit. Not as much though as the Jalisco New Generation cartel. They're almost in every state and they're ruthless, but they changed the business model. It used to be narcotics, but they're almost like I know McDonald's is not going to appreciate what I'm going to say right now, but it's like McDonald's, the corporation, franchising a McDonald's store. The local business, hey, I want to be a McDonald's owner, so I'm going to get a franchise McDonald's. And on McDonald's, I get their branding. I get the commercial, I get the branding, I get the commercial. Well, that's what they've done. They got into commodities, they get in, now they're into oil, they're in avocados, they're in timeshares, they're in all sorts of things. And they're also into extortion. Yep. And so what they do normally is they move into an area. The place I've been looking at a lot has been Guanajuato, one of the states. And so there was a group called, it was a gang, Santa Rosa gang. And the Santa Rosa gang was punching holes into the Mexican government oil pipeline, pumping, it's, siphoning the oil, gas that comes through, and then selling it in the black market or selling it to gas stations. It's like, you're going to buy from us as opposed to selling, so they're making that money. And so they were doing extortion. So the Jalisco cartel came in and said, hey, we like your business model. Why don't you work for us under our brand? They went to the boss, and the boss said, no, we're happy. Okay, so they put a bullet in his head, and then they went to the deputy and said, hey, we're going to give you the same offer. He just saw what happened. He goes, hey, you know what? That sounds like a good offer. We will work for you on that. And so they got the branding from the Jalisco cartel. They got the protection. They've got weapons. They got resources. They need it. And so the business model's changed.
As the CJNG expanded its operations and regional influence, it moved into resort areas where the primary revenue wasn't generated from drugs, but from Western, mainly wealthy American tourists. In those areas, members of local criminal groups would steal or illegally sell databases of information about Americans who had purchased timeshares in the area. For those unaware, a timeshare is essentially a piece of property on a resort that many people collectively own. They each pay a fee every year in exchange for being able to use the property during a predetermined window of time. The only problem is, many timeshare owners don't end up using their property very often and will later want to sell them to offload fees associated with owning them. However, the timeshare business, especially since the pandemic, has created a tough market for people wanting to sell their properties. That's where the CJNG came in.
So I'm gonna.
Zale's Black Friday specials are here and only in limited quantities, with up to 50% off.
Proud to be the largest automotive donor to Meals on Wheels America, helping the well-being.
In history a little bit, prior to 2010, for a number of years, there were kind of sole operators that had their own call centers, and they had information either stolen or leaked, or they bought these databases from hotels that had timeshares in the city of Puerto Vallarta.
That's Steve Fisher on a recent episode of Change Agents, an Ironclad original. He's an investigative reporter based in Mexico City who covers organized crime in Mexico for outlets including the New York Times, USA Today, Washington Post, and LA Times.
Then it became an extraordinary business, but everyone kind of on their own and stuff, and they had these call centers, and they were scamming individuals in the United States who owned timeshares in Puerto Vallarta. In 2010, there was one particular individual who had a call center. And this is according to information provided to me by the U.S. government. And he was within the Jalisco cartel, and he said he came to someone within a position of power in the Jalisco cartel and said, "You guys, you can make so much money on this scam." And they bought the idea and basically went around to all these call centers and either threatened the people working at those call centers that they would have to work for them, or just simply took them out and took over the call centers. And what the Jalisco cartel did with the teaching of, being taught by this individual who had brought them the idea in the first place, was like train individuals to scam Americans, primarily senior citizens in the United States. And they brought in people who have, and I've listened to audio of these people who speak almost perfect English. And they have them set up a network of shell companies and essentially LLCs through which they say, we are this business, you can look us up. We have this sleek website. You can see here that we are this, we're a real estate broker. And what they tell these, the people on the phone, the people they're trying to scam, often people over 60, for the reasons that you mentioned, they consider them a more vulnerable and more lucrative option. They say, look, you have a timeshare. I see you have a timeshare here in Puerto Vallarta. I see that you paid $50,000 for it. And I'm a real estate broker, and I have someone who would love to buy it from you for $75,000. And that sounds amazing because it's really difficult to get rid of your timeshare once you bought it.
Using the stolen databases of the timeshare owners' information, the cartel-run call centers would contact elderly Americans and make them an incredibly generous offer for their property. The only catch, the caller would explain, is the American timeshare owner would first need to pay a series of international fees and logistical costs to unlock the money. But the scam expands beyond the phone calls. The Americans on the other end of the calls even send paperwork that all look very official.
They have this really great website that shows what they do and who they are. And in fact, they have very, very good legal documents that they send them You say, look, here's the legal document, here's the agreement, here's the contract, you know, all of it, everything signed. It just, everything is in order. It looks in order. I mean, some of these people I spoke to who were scammed even brought them to their accountants and said, does this look okay? And they're like, yeah, it looks legit. Let's go for it. Wow, you know, congratulations.
Once they convinced the American timeshare owners that they were representatives from legitimate buyers, the elaborate extended fraud would begin.
I mean, this is like extraordinary, the levels, the layers of fraud that they engage in. And so they say, and the person, they say, look, $75,000, right? But first, it's this whole thing in Mexico. There's this federal tax that you have to pay before, you know, you're in the United States. There's a cross-border tax. It's like a whole, like, you know, equivalent IRS kind of tax that's required. It's a specific law. I can send you the article within the, you know, tax law that shows all of this and stuff. And they're like, oh yeah, sure. And they're like, it's going to be about $3,000. And you know, here's this document that shows this law. This is from the tax agency. I have it now because, of course, you signed this contract. So please just send $3,000 and we'll send you your $75,000. And in fact, once it's all said and done, and once the owner that wants to buy this has actually bought the property, you will be refunded everything that you're. So that's how it begins, with these smaller numbers. And they, over time, it's like they're like, well, look, there's this new thing, there's this new tax, and then they're like, oh, we just sent the check via FedEx. Like, and if you think about it, right, the check in Mexico is probably not going to be cashable in the United States. But still, we send a check, and it's held up at the border because it's more than $10,000, which you can't bring more than $10,000 in cash in the United States. So there's just this fee to allow them, and they go on, and it's like a drip scam, drip defrauding of American senior citizens. And in my story for USA Today, you know, I write about a man that I met who, over a period of 12 years, and more specifically, spent the most in the last 3 years, he was defrauded of $1.8 million.
Even once the American victims realized that they were getting scammed, the cartel timeshare centers still found ways of defrauding them of even more money. Here's Steve Fisher, again, discussing what happened to an American financial planner and timeshare owner once he caught on to the ruse.
Officials are warning of widespread cybersecurity attacks. Frustrations and delays have continued as countless are still without power. Market volatility is at its highest since the pandemic. Number of reports across the state unidentified crashes. There is a number of
Bonjour, it is I, Jean-Pierre, Babywood Sommelier, and today we are...
I hung out in the most dangerous neighborhoods inside of one of the most dangerous cities on earth, Tijuana, Mexico. And what I saw was even wilder than I could have imagined.
Most of Tijuana right now is a bunch of people sleeping in Tijuana and traveling to San Diego to basically work. This is the last border city before you cross into the world's largest drug market.
I thought I wasn't gonna make it past 23, 21. I just wanted to live life like fast. Whatever happened, happened.
You get grabbed by a cartel group, they might not do anything to you. But the police and the military, they're gonna do something. The culture of torture and physical torture, mental, psychological torture in Mexico is vast and open. It's a hellhole, and it's really a torturous place.
Tijuana, or TJ as the locals call it, is the most crime-ridden city in the Western Hemisphere. It is a true Wild West town where anything and everything is for the taking, and murder is as easy as negotiating a price. While all of the eyes of the world are fixed on the recent capture of Sinaloan kingpin Mayo Zambada and the bloody struggle for power in Culiacan, TJ is quietly resuming its rank as one of the most murderous cities in the world, with as many as 10 homicides taking place every day. That's a low number. Even cops and prosecutors get hit up in this town. So who are these underworld players fighting for their slice of the billion-dollar Tijuana to San Diego black market? And how has the shifting drug policy in the United States affected the criminal gangs and cartels in Mexico? To answer these questions, we toured Tijuana with former TJ cop and current knife mogul Ed Calderon and podcaster Fernando Puente, a former dope boy and human smuggler who ran the streets of Tijuana for decades. What we found was nothing short of incredible. And before we get started, please take a minute to like and leave a comment on this video. It really, really helps us out. All right, let's get into it. Everyone knows Tijuana is Sin City. It was formed that way. TJ sprang up as an outlaw border town, a place for American servicemen from San Diego to come down and spend their cash at the bars and whorehouses in the city's infamous red light district, right in the heart of downtown TJ.
Yeah, all the military guys came and did their, like, they still do, but that's how it started the economy out here.
So the economy basically started with illegal activity.
Yeah.
And of course, sharing a border with the world's largest economy and biggest buyer of illicit goods, the United States, has made Tijuana a hotbed of smuggling from the beginning.
It exploded during the Prohibition era.
Yeah.
So people can drink in the U.S. and they came down to Tijuana.
Al Capone owned a ton of property down here and used the Baja Peninsula as the launching point for his rum-running rackets into the United States during Prohibition.
The municipal government building of Ensenada was built and owned by Al Capone.
Today, the port of San Ysidro is the busiest land border in the world, with millions of pedestrians and vehicles crossing into California every day. This city is vast, lawless, and brimming with opportunity. It truly is a criminal's paradise. The first drug cartel in TJ was established in the 1980s by the Arellano Felix family, led by brothers Ramon and Benjamin from Sinaloa, who were gifted the territory by drug lord Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. After he went to prison in the Guadalajara cartel he founded, splintered into 4 separate cartels in regions throughout Mexico.
Tijuana has a phenomenon that it's not like Culiacan, which is far away from the border. A lot of the cartel elements that are old here in Tijuana have grown up on both sides of the border.
The Arellano Felix are now the legacy cartel in Tijuana, the old guard. And although most of the founding members have long since died or gone to prison, their brand has lived on.
What was once the Arellano Felix cartel is now a Tijuana cartel.
The new generation of Tijuana traffickers continue to refer to themselves as the Tijuana cartel or as being part of the Arellano Felix organization, although most have no actual blood ties to the founding family.
Now you're getting people coming in allying themselves with this cartel, with what remains of that cartel from Jalisco. And they come from old leadership as well. And then you get some of the new kids coming in that are working with both of these cartels that are fighting it out. So leadership at the top is old.
However, according to Ed, there are still elements of the old guard in place who have ascended the day-to-day world of drug trafficking and have assimilated into high society on both sides of the border.
The admins are old. The people in charge of the money, the people in charge of the old connections, the people in charge of the payroll for the cops on both sides of the fence, not just Mexico. Like border patrol agents get paid, ICE agents get paid. Like who's in charge of that? That's the true leadership.
It is their deep, entrenched political and business connections.
They've been investing in businesses, families, lawyers, since the 80s. That's how big the organization is. Like they'll have somebody show up with guns. If you get caught up by the cops, lawyers will already be there, and also the person that they pay for that works in the federal,
probably a
judge or somebody is already. All of the police, military, and emergency services are all in the same place, answering all the calls. So if you have somebody there with ears that works for you, you can know what's happening across the city.
As well as their relationship with corrupt law enforcement in Mexico and the U.S. that make much of the drug and human smuggling by the newer Tijuana groups possible.
We have somebody here that works on the smuggling side, and I work on the law enforcement side, and I would look at actions of border protection and ICE and a lot of these institutions that work on that border, and every now and then they would just do this. And just look that way and just see. Money does get into those pockets. It still does.
Fernando Puente grew up in the neighborhood of Colonia Los Altos on the west side of Tijuana.
The Arellano Felix had a control over most of the southern part of Tijuana.
And is that because this is the oldest neighborhood in Tijuana and they're the oldest family, the oldest organization?
Yeah, that's the borders right here. You know,
a stronghold of the Arellano Felix organization.
You kind of knew, like if you look that way, you can only see one big ass house with a lot of cameras and shit like that. So we always, and then military would show up. So you kind of knew who these houses were. Like back in those days, you had fools walking their tigers here.
Baby tigers, leopards. I found a lion in the house once.
And home to some of the most vicious killings that took place during the cartel war years of the mid-2000s.
It's not as filtered as it is in the U.S. when they're aware that there's a law enforcement and phone taps and there's a lot going on. You can't get involved in anything because you get on a list. There's nobody taking lists here. There's nobody tapping phones. If there are, probably cartel guys was like somebody with a lot. So it's different here. Like there's nobody keeping tabs on.
Fernando is a typical Tijuanese. He speaks English, was raised in TJ, but has a U.S. passport, and he's been crossing back and forth over the border almost daily since he was a kid.
When we were young, we were all hustling, like selling like weed and cocaine and shit like that. You know, you start finding ways to like, I mean, some of us had to connect to get like cheap cocaine. So he was saying that I'm a U.S. citizen, so I would be crossing people over.
By the time he was a teenager, he was making a living smuggling illegal immigrants into California.
Maybe twice a day, bring like 1 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, maybe something like that. I'm a U.S. citizen, so I can cross like up to 9 times a day, you know what I mean? And it wouldn't be strange because I've been crossing all my life.
Employing a variety of creative methods to fool the U.S. customs agents.
The guy I used to work for, he'll throw in like a trailblazer, and then he'll have like 4 or 5 people on the back seat, but on the floor, and then just throw like a black blanket on it, and have the driver go to the border. And they made it a bunch of times because even when you lower the window down, if it's dark, you can't really, you know what I mean? You can't really see nothing unless you really like get a light on it and stuff like that. But,
and they usually have scouts looking at each of the agents.
Which line is crossing faster, because sometimes they'll just take your paper, scan it, and give it to you and go. You know,
when is the best time to cross?
In the morning, when people are like from 4 to like 6 in the morning.
Because it's so busy.
Yeah, volume.
Plus, it's just workers going to work.
Right.
Well, we would do even like dress them up as workers, like as gardeners and shit like that, and cross them at that time, and it's like a 90% chance they're gonna make it.
Wow. He also had a drug crew in Los Altos that was moving coke and U.S.-grown weed, which had started to become a trend in that area. High-grade, cartel marijuana grown in the U.S., but shipped south across the border for retail distribution in Mexico.
One of the most used drugs as well here in Tijuana, weed. Right? Weed, some of it shitty weed from Mexico, but most of it California weed.
Guys like me bringing it back.
Yeah. You don't want any shitty weed from here, right?
I know.
Fuck no,
I started bringing weed just for me to smoke, but then people would start, hey, bring me some. So I would start bringing it to sell out here.
A phenomenon that we'll talk more about in a second. No one wants to think about debts, but the cold hard truth of it is many of us will get deeper into debt during the holidays. This is a fact. Last year, half of American consumers took on debt to pay for the holidays. Yikes, that sucks. This year it could be you. It's never too early to start planning to get out of debt. And my friends at PDS Debt can help with a personalized solution just for you. If you're making payments every month on your debt and your balances aren't going down, PDS has solutions for you. Everyone with $10,000 or more in eligible debt qualifies, and there is no minimum credit score required. Bad and fair credit is accepted. Save more while paying off your debt in a fraction of the time. I wish I had PDS Debt when I was just getting started in comedy. I was new to LA, not getting paid to do my sets. In fact, I was losing money every time I got on stage. I was putting everything on credit cards. This is true. Gas, rent, drinks at the club. I was in the red for a lot of years. Every day I was full of dread and anxiety, worried about how I was going to pay off my debt and still keep myself above water. It would have been so nice to have a company help me put a plan together and relieve the stress I was carrying around. These guys have customized options for anyone struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills. PDS Debt strives to understand your specific scenario and can help provide alternative solutions to becoming debt-free. Start planning today. Get a free debt analysis right now at pdsdebt.com/theConnect. It only takes 30 seconds. That's pdsdebt.com/theConnect. Thank you so much for sponsoring the show. Check them out if you need help restructuring your debt. Let's get back into the episode. Fernando represents a group of criminals usually not talked about when we think of organized crime in Tijuana. And those are retail-level drug dealers who service TJ's massive internal demand for narcotics.
What you're seeing now is an injection of capital, like cash capital from Americans living here, that no longer have to buy their drugs in San Diego or somewhere out there. They buy them here locally. So now you're seeing this California in the 90s style gangs forming. So you have the street presence of the market where they sell and they control, which is exposed. So that's who you can kill if you're a rival. And then you have segments of the city being like, this is our territory, this is your territory. This is your street corner you can sell off. This is your street corner you can sell off. And if you want to attack each other, the most exposed element there is the dude on the corner selling.
One of the disturbing, very disturbing, and blatant abuses of government in Project 2025 is the idea that they want to track women's pregnancies. They want to track where they're going. They want to track everything.
You see, Tijuana is filled with junkies. It's actually unbelievable. Official statistics place the number at 500,000 addicts in a city of about 2.5 million people. That's almost a fourth of the population. And the actual number is probably much higher, especially when you account for all of the junkies from San Diego who venture south, cross the border every day to get their fix.
It's growing because we just got an influx of new drug users from the U.S. who are now living here, and they don't have to cross the border to go into buy their thing. Now they live here.
So do you actually have junkies that just permanently relocated to Tijuana to live?
No, we have junkies that come, cross the border, get high, and then they go back.
They go back.
Yeah. Crystal meth is the biggest winner.
What's the most popular street drug in Tijuana right now?
It has to be crystal meth.
In TJ, it's considered a working man's high.
It'll get your work, you know? It's like coffee.
I mean, some of the cigars get paid with that.
Yeah. So
it's crystal meth.
It's like a base level, like everybody, that's like a moneymaker here still.
But there's also spots that serve heroin and crack cocaine, which are no doubt products of the demand from the other side, from the US. Most interestingly, though, is the rise in imported high-grade marijuana from California being sold on the streets of Tijuana.
That's another weird aspect that nobody talks about. There's a giant traffic weed market.
American weed market
in Tijuana.
Coming into Mexico.
Pre-rolls, edibles, all that packaged stuff that you see, all nice and shit.
People load themselves out and just cross, and they become like a little side hustle.
Think about how wild that is. Drugs are supposed to get smuggled north into the United States, not the other way around. But that's what legalization in America did. There's very little racket left for cartel growers in the U.S. to make profit domestically. All of the legal grows and dispensaries have bottomed out the price. So what have they done? Simply turned south to places like Tijuana, where pot is still illegal and the black market is thriving.
Now there's more money selling weed in Mexico than there is in the U.S.
And you can
If
see
you're a dope dealer.
and you can see lines of that because they're burning and extorting and attacking smoke shops here, which is like it's like the public face of that.
Groups like Fernando dot each part of the city, dealing out of their respective plazas.
As a criminal, you kind of freelance until you want to actually like be serious with somebody with like a crew or like the main cartel shit. That's when you know what I mean. But other than that, you're like you can be like crossing people. You could be selling. You can be doing all kinds of and not be cartel related.
So you're allowed to hustle independently.
If you have the correct friends, because if you're really like don't know anybody, but you're doing it, and then somebody knows, then you might get checked about it. You know what I mean?
These micro traffickers are usually not part of the cartel.
It's small organizations related with the bigger cartels, independents working here, but being taxed by higher ups,
and often receive their material wholesale from them. Fernando explains the benefits of joining the cartel versus remaining independent.
What is the difference when you're just between just being a hustler, like a drug dealer in TJ, and then actually joining an organization?
Well, you're directly with them. Like you depend on them. They're giving you the stuff you sell. They're giving you the you cross. You know, if you get pulled over, they help you out. You know,
it's a job. I mean, it's like
if you up, you get the tablet. You know what I mean? Also,
it's a job. You get a salary,
a weekly salary.
You get a phone.
You got to answer every time.
You get weapons. You don't get delivered to you. You don't carry weapons.
You got to turn them back in as soon as you shoot somebody. You got to go turn them back
because
in.
they don't want you to get caught with a hot gun. So it's like you're a cell. You're working for them. But all the logistics are separate.
These street-level micro-trafficking gangs could explain some of the rising violence Tijuana has experienced in recent years, in large part fueled by the exploding demand for drugs from Americans crossing into TJ.
Right now, it's more gang-type violence because now you have like 3 organizations in Tijuana. So like this whole neighborhood might be run by one, but as soon as you cross that main avenue there, that's the sombreros. You know what I mean? That's a whole other thing.
In the past, it was always very public executions of people. They would just go into the middle of the day with a bunch of armed people and just stray people. Now it's more targeted. Now it's like a drug dealer on one corner that is working for the rival cartel, and they'll see a guy show up with a 45, or a dude that has a money laundering operation for one cartel, getting his business and himself burned alive.
Fernando took us to one of the busiest traps in the whole city, in the infamous Zona Norte neighborhood, just a few hundred yards from the border fence.
So right now we're in an alley here in Zona Norte, one of the few places where you really got to know somebody to just...
So this is a trap. This is a trap.
This is a whole trap neighborhood. Like I mean, don't point the camera otherwise, but there's people like watching out like alleys and just pointing, and people know we're here already. You know what I mean? People know there's a weird white guy recording right now. But since we're with him, nobody's tripping. You know what I mean?
Do gringos junkies from San Diego know that this is the spot to come if they want to get high?
Si vienen gringos hasta acá, yeah.
These men who are operating the trap are old friends of Fernando's and use various dilapidated buildings on this block to serve crack, crystal meth, heroin, and weed. Although not officially employed by the cartel, this particular trap has been sanctioned for these men by the Ariano Felix organization.
You can't freelance here.
Yeah, you can't do this without...
You can't freelance here.
So there's no freelancing here. There was freelancing in your neighborhood.
Maybe, yeah.
Down here.
A small...
This is like, aquí es un mercado, there's a giant market here. Like, this is like, yeah, there's money here. There's no way you can just, I'm just going to set up shop here. Either these guys that own here will kill you, or somebody just like, they're making money here.
It is prime drug dealing real estate, and they tell us that they must pay royalties from all of their sales to the cartel. On the menu at this particular trap was weed, the cheaper Mexican-grown strains from Sinaloa, and the high-grade stuff coming in from California.
For me that I live there, you want to get good weed, you will come here. I'm to la zona because they get the good weed.
I asked one of them if he had ambitions to move up in the organization, to become a wholesaler rather than serving retail all day in the trenches. And in typical Mexican fashion, he said, why bother? It wasn't worth the risk. And he's right. In Mexico, the drug trade carries real risk.
They don't give about people selling weed. They don't give about the drug sales point. But they get burnt. The business is being burned. The business is being extorted. And that's what flips the citizenship. So if they find somebody that's sympathetic to that, like, hey, these guys are helping us out, they'll never report these guys to the cops.
What's up, you guys? I hope you're enjoying this episode. I just had to take a sec to tell you about our new merch line. That's right. We finally did it. We have exclusive limited run hoodies, shirts, and hats. Go to theconnectmerch.com. As you can see, I'm wearing this Chapo hoodie in the style of a botero for all you art geeks out there. Like I said, this is a limited run. Once we sell out, there's no more. It's only going to be up for about 2 weeks. So go over to theconnectmerch.com and get your hoodie, your shirt, and your hats today. All right, let's get back into the episode.
Lately, the biggest risk to the boys in this trap hasn't come from other cartels, but from cristaleros, or crystal meth addicts, who have been extorting and robbing the street vendors and small businesses in the neighborhood.
I never heard that before. So pretty cool. The fact that
people that were hooked on meth before me or cocaine, different than now people are on the.
Now he had a gun on him, right?
Yeah, they got to, because they're fighting those guys. They're fighting the meth heads that try to like extort the businesses. They do the community watch for them.
So they're not worried about getting caught with drugs and a gun. Like in the U.S., that's a double charge. You know what I mean?
Not right here. Nah, here.
One of the guys showed us the bullet scars from where he had a gunfight with one of these cristaleros after he confronted him about this extortion that they've been doing. Besides hand-to-hand drug sales, the fellas in this trap are also coyotes for hire.
So basically what they do is there'll be somebody checking from one of the streets I showed you earlier that are on a higher plane, and just with the phone, and they'll guide you just with the phone. Like, yeah, now you got to jump this fence, now you got to run this, turn right, whatever.
Human smuggling is arguably more profitable than the drug business now, and low risk, especially the way these guys tell us they do it.
They'll dress in the military clothing. Yeah, with a drone. They'll follow them with a drone.
Using drones to monitor the location of the Border Patrol agents on the U.S. side, these guys will, in real time, guide the migrants over a cell phone through the cutout holes in the border fence and into the mainland United States.
And it's usually Mexicans?
Pues que si los pueden son mexicanos. Sí, sí. Yeah.
Sí, porque los de otros países los mandan al trabajador nomás.
Yeah, the people from other countries, they send them as bait.
Contrary to what the media would have us believe, the majority of the migrants they smuggle are not South American or Chinese or African. They're fellow Mexicans.
What's the success rate of people getting through from this?
Out of 10, 7 might get through.
That's good. But it's not out of some patriotic sense of loyalty. It's because Mexican migrants pay the most, up to $10,000 a head for this kind of guided drone surveillance smuggling. Migrants from these aforementioned places like Haiti and Africa do attempt to cross, but the majority do not have the big money needed for the high-tech smuggling service and therefore end up getting caught.
So that the immigrants that are Mexican, they get stuck in Tijuana. They come from Venezuela, Africa.
I mean, they don't get stuck.
They stay.
They stay. Some of them stay. Some of them cross, but they don't get the good crossings. Like the ones that have ISIS X-ray, you have to pay for.
Now, many Haitian migrants have opted to forego the crossing and instead have set down roots in Tijuana, where they enjoy a relatively high quality of life. So as you can see, the domestic demand for drugs inside of Tijuana is enormous, making trap spots like the one we visited extremely lucrative. And still, at the end of the day, these guys are just nickel baggers, guppies in a world controlled by whales. The cartels, just like the government, barely seem to bother with them.
Harvey Lexus has been serving the community for over 35 years. Now that's longevity. Experience amazing at our Elite of Lexus dealership and immerse yourself in the latest Lexus SUVs, EVs, and sedans. Lease a new 2025 NX 350 all-wheel drive for
After Miguel Gallardo, the original Mexican drug lord, was arrested in 1989, the Guadalajara cartel splintered into 4 separate organizations: Juarez, Sonora, Sinaloa, and Tijuana. The turf was divided up. The problem, of course, was that Tijuana had something the Sinaloans never had: the border. But for about 17 years, the two groups managed to get along. Tijuana allowed Sinaloa and other cartels to move product through their territory in exchange for a fee. And what they offered these other organizations was the safe warehousing of their merchandise in stash houses all over the city, plus access to their contacts in government and corrupt customs agents to then successfully move that merchandise across the border. It seemed like a fair exchange, and there was a limit to the violence until 2006, when Chapo Guzman, the fastest rising star in the Sinaloa cartel, decided he wanted it all. His army of sicarios began attacking targets in Juarez and Tijuana at the same goddamn time. Psychotic. Fernando was a young D-boy at the time when the violence really kicked off.
I did this back in 2006, these 2 right here. And you can see the other ones are stomped by my friends did the other ones. My friends passed away already, so I think that's why mine are still untouched, because I'm still here and I still pull up to the blog. And
what happened to all your friends?
Well, it's just a life, you know. So most of them got killed, shot, or betrayed, or stuff like that.
His neighborhood of Los Altos was ground zero for incursions by Sinaloan mercenaries who patrolled the streets looking for Arellano Felix stash houses, which they would then raid and kill everyone inside.
They were doing all kinds of intentions right here. You see guys switching cars and just talking about like radios and shit. So we called him and we told him about it, and he called his contact, and like 20 police showed up and they just started patrolling him because he was paying the cartel that the Sinaloans, they didn't really have the government backup like them, so they left. But like 2 days later, they got him outside. He was walking out and they kidnapped him, and he was hung from a bridge. And that was one of the first like narco messages that when the war really started. You know what I mean?
This was also the beginning of the so-called narco manta era. in which cartels would hang their victims from freeway overpasses next to large banners with warnings to the opposition scribbled on them.
I read in Culiacan that 99% of the homicides go unsolved. Same thing across the country and same thing here.
It was common at this time for Greater Tijuana to experience up to 20 homicides per day and nearly as many disappearances.
When they shot them, they were laying in the street for about an hour before anybody came. We have friends calling us like, hey, wait, they shot these fools, they're out here, they're just laying there. We call the cops, but they're not showing up. They showed up to like an hour and 20 minutes later.
Nobody's going to investigate that. Nobody's going to look
It's just too much, even if they tried to, man. It's just too much. Like the shooting he's talking about, I have a podcast with one of the main perpetrators of that stuff, and they were shooting each other from like across the street, from right here, just a bunch of fools shooting. And then people started running away, so you find bodies like in like 20 minutes away. You'll find people like, showing up dead or...
The violence got so brazen that a special elite police unit was formed to tackle the bloodshed that had gripped Tijuana.
The only successful counter organized crime program ever implemented in Mexico was here.
Ed Calderon was only 21 years old at the time that he got recruited to join this elite squad of cartel hunters.
When I got put through my first few months of training, physical beatings were part of it. I'm not talking about a drill sergeant screaming in your face. I'm talking about floggings, waterboarding situations being utilized, but just as hazing rituals, beatings. And then when you go out and you see some of the older guys who are there to instruct you as a new guy, you'll see them pull out a plastic bag and put it out over.
Police say so far this month, 11 women have been killed in Juarez.
Crimes against women across our border is releasing some new numbers.
2 women who were killed and found in the body of a young woman.
In 1995, law enforcement in the city of Juarez made a gruesome discovery: a mass grave that contained the bodies of women who'd been systematically brutalized. Many had their hands tied behind their backs and displayed signs that they had been sexually assaulted. Investigators also noticed a disturbing clue as to who may have been responsible for the killings. Several of the bodies had a triangle carved into their backs. These didn't just look like murders. These looked like ritual killings. These women had been tortured.
Every week since his daughter disappeared more than a year ago, Gaspar Mendoza has waited outside the state prosecutor's office in Ciudad Juarez, looking for help.
A year later, another one of these mass graves was discovered that contained the bodies of women and even teenage girls who had been horrifically tortured and murdered. In the coming months and years, a total of 5 mass graves were discovered in and around the city of Juarez. But as law enforcement agencies on both sides of the borders searched for answers, more women and teenage girls were going missing. Some of their bodies had been drowned in seedy hotel bathrooms, disregarded in the deserts, or mutilated on the outskirts of poor neighborhoods. Since the discovery of the first mass graves in 1995, the bodies of hundreds of women, some bearing strange symbols carved into them, have been discovered. Hundreds of other women and teenage girls have vanished from the streets while walking to school or work, never to be heard from again. My name is Vincent Vargas. I'm the host of the Borderland podcast, an Ironclad original, and I'm a Border Patrol Search, Trauma, and Rescue Unit veteran with years of experience working on the U.S.-Mexico border. On the southern border, there is a legal concept known as reasonable fear. If an asylum officer determines that a migrant has a reasonable fear of persecution or torture if returned to their home country, then removal procedures can be delayed. And in the current border crisis, there has been no greater source of reasonable fear cases than the Mexican drug cartels.
B's uncle with me and B. Guess who's coming out of Benihana's? Frank and Mario.
Wow. What are the odds of that?
Exactly, right? So I'm looking at them. They're looking at me. Frank is looking at me, but his face is starting to turn red. So I sense something. Mario is looking, but Mario is more like a So I tell, I believe it's Sam here with me. I tell Sam to go ahead and take B and his uncle on in. Now, B uncle came up to see how it was set up. But when he came to see how it was set up, I showed him weed that I had from the Tijuana cartel, let him see I'm already working to make it more attractive. But I tell him to take them on in. So that actually was Big Eye. Sam stayed with me. So Frank walks up and says, hey, Wayne, how are you doing? So I'm pretty good. Frank, how are you? Face deep red. When are you going to pay my money? And what do you mean, pay your money? You owe me $300,000. When are you going to pay me my money? I said, whoa, player. I don't owe you no $300,000. I said, the only thing I owe you is $70,000. And I'll give you that. Mario on the back. See, I told you. I told you. He's yelling in the middle of the park lot, arms flailing and all night. I told you, Big Dog. My brother, they call him Big Dog. Big Dog is lying to you. I told you. So Frank looks at him. He's getting more red. But in disgust, he said, no, your brother told me, your brother owes me $300,000. And he said that you are the reason that I have